What the hell is going on? You didn't make lunch today. My husband abruptly yelled at me over the phone. He seemed irritated that I hadn't prepared his lunch and that I had been away from home. I told him to take care of himself while I was gone, but he retorted, "Look, you're a housewife, right? You skipped your studies to be one, remember?" He didn't seem convinced, making such a big deal about not having lunch for just one day. I was fed up with him. I did all the housework, and he would still take it out on me when things didn't go his way. My mother-in-law stood beside me, a faint smile on her face as she listened to my husband's yelling over the phone. "My name is Emily. I live with my husband Nicholas and our 2 children, Seth and Ray, who are twin boys just 2 years old. Despite the challenges, I'm so happy being the mother of these adorable twins. Raising them is the source of my current happiness." Nicholas is a typical businessman. His family owns a Japanese-style confectionery store in a shopping arcade. I quit my job shortly after our marriage to help my in-laws with their store. I started working there with a light heart, but it turned out to be much busier than I had anticipated. I not only served customers with a colorful selection of wagashi, but I also made my own sweets in the back kitchen. I had to be in the kitchen from early morning to prepare the sweets on time, especially during the busiest times of the year. Even after the birth of my twins, I continued to assist at the store. Sometimes I would stand in the store with my children on my back. Their cries would sometimes carry through to the store even when I was babysitting them away from the shop. Despite all this, my husband was unconcerned about the confectionery business. "Hey, do you still have no plans to take over the confectionery business?" I asked him. We discussed it several times, but Nicholas seems to have no intention of taking over the business. "I'm not taking over the store. I've told you numerous times I'm not going to take over the store. Isn't wagashi so lame these days? The number of people in the shopping arcade is decreasing year by year, and if I take over the confectionery business now, I will have no future." Nicholas had no desire to take over his family's wagashi. Of course, he couldn't take over the store right now because he worked for a larger corporation, but I liked my in-laws' store and didn't want to see it go away. "Are you going to the pachinko parlor again today, Nicholas?" "Sure, of course I am. What I do on my day off is entirely up to me," he replied. On holidays, my husband always went out to play pachinko. He would even get in line as soon as it opened. Despite this, he ignored the housework. I did all the cooking, cleaning, and laundry, as well as the rest of the housework. Moreover, the most important aspect of child rearing was completely left to me. My husband spent his time at his own pace while I was busy with housework, childcare, and the confectionery shop. My in-laws are getting older, and my workload at the confectionery shop is increasing. Fortunately, they were extremely understanding of my situation. "Emily, you help us with the store, and we are very grateful. Thank you so much for everything," my mother-in-law would always say. She is a lovely lady who doesn't fit the typical mother-in-law stereotype. Her gentle and kind smile always warmed my heart. "I really need Nicholas's assistance. He no longer appears to be interested in the confectionery," she explained sadly. My mother-in-law always looked crestfallen whenever we talked about my husband. I suppose she really wants him to take over the company, but her husband refused to agree. "Well, we're lucky to have such a wonderful wife, Emily. We should stop being greedy." My mother-in-law would lavish praise on me. She valued my assistance at the store while I raised my children. When I was at the shop, she and my father-in-law would babysit the kids, which was a big help. My mother-in-law had become my go-to person, someone I could talk to about anything. Of course, she listened to my complaints about my husband. Ironically, the more distant I felt from him, the stronger my bond with my mother-in-law grew. The presence of my in-laws was very reassuring to me. Right now, life felt like a blur. Raising 2 children meant that each day flew by with no time to think about anything else. As the end of the year approached, the confectionery became busier. It coincided with the end-of-year gift-giving season, and we were in transition. After consulting with my in-laws, I decided to stay at home this year and focus on wagashi preparation. I informed my husband, "What? You're taking the kids and staying at my parents' house?" My husband was clearly upset. I explained that I would only be staying for one night to help out on a busy day. "And what about the housework?" he asked, as expected. For my husband, who does no housework at all, this was a serious problem. If I don't do housework for even one day, he gets upset, even during the busy season for the confectionery. "This time, I'll only be away for one night. Can't you be cooperative during that time? It's just a single day, so everything should be fine, right?" If you get hungry, you can prepare some meals. There will be no laundry to do if it's only for one day, I told him, assuring him there was nothing to be concerned about. But he continued to complain. You know what, you're still a housewife, aren't you? I'm telling you again, I'm the family's breadwinner. Who do you think is in charge of feeding our 2 children? My husband began to grumble, and I didn't want to talk to him any longer. Taking action without his permission, I didn't say anything else and took the kids to my in-laws' house without my husband's permission. When I arrived, a lot of work was waiting for me. It was the end of the year and business was brisk at the Wagashia. Orders for year-end gifts were pouring in faster than usual, and my decision to stay and assist was justified. The creation of gift items began with assembling empty boxes, a surprisingly difficult job, especially at the end of the year when hundreds of boxes had to be made for year-end gifts. My in-laws and I divided up the box-making duties. After the first day at my in-laws' house, I was exhausted, but the next day I had to work hard from early in the morning to make wagashi. To prepare for the busy day ahead, I decided to go to bed early. By the time dawn arrived, I had already started working. While the kids were still sleeping, my in-laws and I stayed in the kitchen quietly working on the wagashi. The sun had risen before I knew it, and the fresh morning air signaled a new day. We decided to take a break and eat breakfast. The kids were already awake and ready for their meal. I hurriedly prepared breakfast and served it at the table. They came running up to me, smiling. My in-laws, the children, and I all sat around the table. Just then, my phone rang. It was my husband. What the heck is going on? You didn't make lunch today, he yelled as soon as I picked up. He seemed irritated that there was no lunchbox, which he expected to be available at all times. A shocking proposal. I told him to make his own lunch while I was gone. Had he forgotten? What do you mean, avoiding housework? He demanded, clearly unconvinced. When I suggested he prepare the food himself, he accused me of laziness. What a prick, making such a big deal about not having lunch for one day. He leaves everything up to me, and when things don't go his way, he transforms into this. I was shocked, and my in-laws appeared to be as well. They could clearly hear my husband yelling over the phone. He rambled on about his complaints before abruptly hanging up. Although breakfast had just been served, the living room of my in-laws' house fell silent. My husband lost his cool in such an unreasonable way. Just as expected, the kids seemed to sense the tension and refused to eat their breakfast. My mother-in-law cheerfully said, "Itadakamasu," urging my sons to eat as well, trying to lighten the mood. Then she turned to me and said, "Why don't you divorce my son, Emily?" I froze, my hand hovering over my tea. I never expected my mother-in-law to say something like that. My father-in-law quietly ate his breakfast, an indescribable expression on his face. A turning point. I believe I was a little out of line, but now that you've been told something like that, I hope you've come to your senses, my mother-in-law said, smiling at me. It seems that when someone is truly disgusted, there's nothing left to do but laugh. I feel terrible for you as a mother. You are no longer required to be merciful to my son. Allow your emotions to guide you, she continued. My mother-in-law had probably figured out how I felt about Nicholas by now. She was always supportive and encouraging, and now I knew she was on my side. My father-in-law never spoke much, but he nodded in agreement with his wife's words. Their presence was reassuring, and it was that day that I returned home with a decision made. Later in the evening, my husband came home with a tense expression, clearly still upset about the lunch. I asked him to take a seat because I needed to speak with him. "What do you want to talk about?" he asked, cocking an eyebrow and looking at me. "Sit down," I repeated, ignoring his mood. When he sat down, I held out the divorce papers. "I'm going to divorce you. I'm going to divorce you," I said, the words slipping out of my mouth. My husband's grumpy expression abruptly changed to one of surprise. "Why did you say divorce so abruptly? Are you kidding me? The kids are still so young." He was in a panic, unable to understand why I was seeking a divorce. He adamantly refused to consider divorce, insisting there was no reason for it. He tried to avoid the discussion by claiming it was invalid. "There's a reason," I said, stopping him from fleeing. I pulled a few photos from an envelope on the table and placed them in front of him. One photo showed my husband walking with a woman, holding hands. "Didn't you say you go to Pachinko on your days off? What exactly is this? You appear to be having a good time," I said. When he saw the photo, my husband's face turned pale. Confronting the truth, I pressed him to tell me what was going on. No, this is, well, he stumbled over his words, trying to make up some nonsense excuse about how she was just an acquaintance. She's a junior employee at your company, isn't she? I said. My husband's movements ceased when I mentioned the identity of the woman in the photograph. He had been having an affair with a younger woman who worked at the same company. I had been suspicious of his behavior and had discussed it with my mother-in-law for some time. She suggested I hire a detective to investigate. The findings of the subsequent investigation astounded me. My husband had entered a pachinko parlor with a woman and then gone directly to her room. I have more photos, I said. You two are very close, so the investigator could take many photos. Would you like to see more? Confronted with undeniable evidence, my husband finally confessed. He admitted that while he was a pachinko fan, he also had a romantic relationship with this woman and had been visiting her room during the day. I'm sorry, Emily, he said. I was just experimenting with fire. I'm sorry for the kids. I'm leaving this girl right now, so please don't divorce me. He was no longer at my mercy, apologizing emphatically. However, I would never forgive him. I'm dead set on getting a divorce. I'm not joking. I've been assisting at your parents' home while babysitting and taking care of things you don't want to do. I've informed your father and mother about this. My in-laws knew everything. Standing my ground, I told my husband that my in-laws were on my side, not his. They both stated they would assist me in any way they could. Since we work together, we've had plenty of time to talk, they explained. We're both furious at you. Of course, I informed them that we were divorcing. My husband completely lost his cool and broke down in tears. Please, I would never do something like this, he muttered, overwhelmed by the situation. He kept insisting he didn't want a divorce, but I was resolute. I can't do this with you any longer, I said. I will make certain you pay alimony and child support. I served him with divorce papers. My husband begged for forgiveness on his knees, but I refused to listen. As a result, we divorced. I insisted on alimony payments from both my husband and the woman he had an affair with. My husband also had to pay child support for our children. After the company discovered their affair, my husband chose to resign, and the woman lost her position. My in-laws were furious and informed my husband he would be cut off from the family and bored from their home. With no one to rely on, he was compelled to work manual labor from morning to night to pay his bills. After the divorce, I continued to work at the Wagashia. My in-laws asked me to stay, and I gladly agreed. I enjoy working in the store and, of course, need to support my children. My in-laws want me to run the store after they retire and plan to eventually give me both the store and their home. Naturally, I intend to take over. I will be the proprietress of the confectionery. I will continue to work hard and raise my children while looking forward to the future.
Life as a marketer was a relentless race, but I was good at it, really good. My name's Lucy, and by the time I hit 33, I had nailed down almost everything I'd set my sights on, including buying my own place. Only a couple of payments left and the apartment would officially be mine. No time for slowing down, though, not even for romance. That is, until I bumped into Jack. Jack was one of those rare guys who seemed to have popped right out of some dreamy fiction, where chivalry wasn't dead. We met at a local coffee shop, both of us reaching for the last blueberry muffin. He let me have it, but not without securing my number as a trade-off. Smart guy. From then on, it was like a fast-forward montage from a movie. Dates flowed into weekends away, and gifts started appearing on my doorstep, nothing extravagant, but always thoughtful. He had this knack for remembering things I mentioned in passing, my favorite author, that I loved tulips over roses, or how I preferred my coffee. It wasn't long before I was head over heels. And his attachment to his mom? I admired it. He'd call her every day, made sure she had everything she needed. "She's my queen," he'd say, and I saw it as a sign of his loyalty and love. A guy who treated his mom like royalty was bound to treat his wife like a queen, right? Then came the proposal. It was nothing fancy, just us, in our favorite little park. The ring was perfect, simple and elegant, just like I always wanted. I said yes, without skipping a beat. But when we started talking about where we'd live, that's when things got a bit sticky. His mom, Maggie, sweet as she was in her own way, had her own ideas. She wanted us to move in with her. Jack broached the topic gently one evening, while we were cleaning up after dinner in my apartment. "Lucy, babe, Mom suggested we move in with her. Saves money, and she'd love the company," he said, drying a plate and not quite meeting my eyes. I put down the dish I was washing, water still running. "Jack, I love your mom, you know I do. But babe, we need our own space. Just us." He looked conflicted but nodded. "I get it, I really do. It's just, Mom's alone a lot, you know?" I turned off the water and leaned against the counter. "What if we find a place nearby? That way, we're close, but not too close. She can have us over anytime she wants, but we keep our privacy too. How does that sound?" Jack's face brightened. "Yeah, that could work. I'll talk to her about it." And so, we compromised. We found a rental not 10 minutes from Maggie's place. It seemed ideal. I figured over time, as we settled into married life, Jack's attachment might shift more towards our little unit. With that in mind, I rented out my apartment and started stashing away the extra income. The move was smoother than I expected. Jack was happy because his mom was just a stone's throw away, and I was relieved to maintain some independence. We fell into a comfortable routine, Jack and I commuting to work together most days, coming home to our little sanctuary. But as weeks turned into months, I couldn't shake the feeling that the ties that bound Jack to his mom weren't loosening. Every decision, big or small, seemed to need her stamp of approval. I found myself wondering if our compromise was truly that, or just a temporary fix to a permanent issue. Life was bustling as usual, my marketing job keeping me on my toes during the day, and the new marital home chores waiting each evening. Things took a sharp turn when Maggie fell sick. It wasn't anything life-threatening, thank goodness, but enough to knock the strength out of her. "Lucy, can you check on Mom after work? She's really not feeling well," Jack asked one morning as we were rushing out the door, his face lined with worry. "Of course, I'll swing by and see what she needs," I replied, squeezing his hand. Little did I know, this would become my new routine. Each evening, I'd go straight from the office to Maggie's. She had a specific way she liked things done, especially when it came to her meals. "I can't eat that reheated stuff, it messes with my stomach," she'd complain if I ever dared suggest cooking enough to last a couple of meals. So, I found myself cooking fresh meals daily, her preferred dishes that I slowly mastered. After Maggie recovered, I thought my after-work visits would taper off. I couldn't have been more wrong. She'd grown accustomed to the company and the care. If anything, her demands increased. "Lucy, dear, could you help me with the laundry? And maybe we can order some groceries online," she'd say, her voice always carrying that expectant tone. I did all that and more, picking up her orders, driving her to shops, and every beauty appointment she made. Weekends were no exception. Jack and I spent most of our Saturdays and Sundays at Maggie's, trying to make up for all the family time she missed when Jack's brother cut her off. One particularly exhausting Sunday evening, after a day filled with errands and family gatherings all centered around Maggie's needs, I collapsed on our couch, feeling more like a caretaker than a wife. "Jack, we need to talk," I started, my voice heavy with fatigue. "I love your mom, but I need some space, some time for us." Jack sat beside me, his expression tense. "Lucy, Mom's all alone. You know what happened with my brother. I can't just abandon her. She relies on us." I knew about his brother, how he and his wife had moved away, cutting off all contact with Maggie after their wedding. Torn between my need for independence and my husband's loyalty to his mother, I felt isolated. Yet, seeing Jack so earnest, so committed to not repeating his brother's path, I relented. "Okay, Jack. We'll keep things as they are for now," I conceded, trying to mask my disappointment. "Thank you, babe. I know it's a lot. We'll figure something out, I promise," he said, pulling me into a hug that felt both comforting and confining. As days turned into weeks, my after-work routine remained unchanged. Maggie's house became a second job, one that paid in tired smiles and a sense of duty. My own dreams and desires took a back seat, tucked away like the old novels I no longer had time to read. A year has passed since that conversation, but nothing much had changed. If anything, things got even more intense. Every day after work, my second shift began, cooking, cleaning, running errands for Maggie. By the time I got home each night, I was wiped out. One evening, sprawled on our couch with aching feet propped up, I broached a subject that had been on my mind for a while. "Jack, don't you think it's time we think about having our own little family?" I asked, trying to sound as casual as possible, despite the butterflies in my stomach. Jack's face lit up, a stark contrast to my tired expression. "That's a fantastic idea, babe. Imagine a little one of ours running around. And hey, we could buy a bigger house, move in with Mom to help out. What do you think?" The thought of living permanently under the same roof as Maggie sent a chill down my spine. I was thinking more along the lines of just us, you know? Just our little family. "We can talk about that part later, let's just focus on the baby for now," Jack said quickly, probably sensing my hesitation. I agreed, knowing we needed a serious discussion about boundaries before anything was set in stone. Despite the unresolved living situation, we told Maggie about our plans to try for a baby. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "A baby, huh? That's wonderful. You two will make great parents." Her tone was flat, and I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt, wondering if she felt like we were trying to replace her with a new family member. But I pushed those thoughts aside, focusing on the future. Months turned into a year, and despite all our hopes and efforts, nothing happened. I followed every health tip I could find, cut out alcohol, ate healthier, hit the gym more. Still, no baby. Worried, I booked an appointment with a specialist to see if something was wrong. Sitting in the sterile clinic, after countless tests, the doctor finally had some answers. "It's unusual, Lucy, but your blood work shows elevated levels of a hormone found in birth control pills. Have you been taking any form of contraceptive?" I stared at him, bewildered. "No, absolutely not. We've been trying to conceive. Why would I take birth control?" The doctor looked just as confused as I felt. "It's definitely odd. If you're sure about not taking any contraceptives, this shouldn't be happening. Sometimes, prescriptions can get mixed up." I thanked him, my mind racing as I left the clinic. The drive home was a blur. How could this be happening? I'd been so careful with everything, checking and double-checking everything I consumed. Did someone tamper with my medication? The idea seemed ludicrous, but desperation and confusion clouded my thoughts. That evening, as per usual, I was at Maggie's house, cleaning up after dinner when I noticed something that made my heart stop. An empty package of birth control pills peeking out from underneath some other trash in the bin. The room spun a little as I pulled it out, examining it. This had to be a mistake. "Maggie, can I ask where these came from?" I said, holding up the blister pack for her to see. My voice was calm, but inside, I was anything but. Maggie glanced over, her face draining of color as she saw what was in my hand. "Oh, those? I don't know, must be old," she stammered, looking anywhere but at me. "That's funny, because it looks recent. And I just found out I've been having birth control in my system. Been wondering why we couldn't get pregnant," I said, each word sharper than the last, watching her closely. The air felt heavy, thick with tension as Maggie shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Lucy, you have to understand, Understand what, Maggie? That you've been messing with my life? My marriage?" The shock was giving way to a burning anger, my voice rising despite my attempt to control it. Maggie sighed, a long, weary sound. "It's just, if you had a baby, then you'd stop coming around as much. Jack would stop. I can't lose him too, not like I lost his brother," she confessed, her voice cracking with emotion. "So you decided to play God with my body?" I was incredulous, feeling the sting of betrayal from someone I had trusted, someone I had cared for. "I'm sorry, Lucy. I thought I was protecting my time with my son. That's all. Her apology sounded hollow, doing nothing to cool my anger. I didn't have it in me to argue further. I left her house, a storm of emotions brewing inside me. At home, I waited for Jack, rehearsing the conversation in my head. When he walked through the door, I didn't waste a moment. Your mom has been replacing my vitamins with birth control pills. That's why we couldn't get pregnant. I found the pack in her trash. I blurted it out, the words tasting bitter. Jack froze, his expression one of confusion that slowly morphed into disbelief. Mom? No, she wouldn't. She admitted it, Jack. She did it because she thought we'd stop visiting if we had a baby. After a moment of tense silence, he sighed, running his hands through his hair. Lucy, I know it sounds bad, but, you know Mom's been alone a long time. She was just scared. Can't you see that? Please don't be mad at her. Mad? Jack, she violated my body, our trust. How can you just stand there and defend her? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It felt like the world was upside down. I get it, it's messed up. But she's my mom, Lucy. We can get past this, right? Let's just forget it happened and move on, he said, almost pleading. Forget it happened? As if it were that simple. But I saw in his eyes that arguing would get me nowhere. From that day, I kept a vigilant watch over everything in our home. No more unsupervised visits to the medicine cabinet for Maggie. 2 months later, despite the odds, I found out I was pregnant. The joy was tempered by caution, given the recent betrayal. When we told Maggie, her reaction was as cold as ice. That's nice, she said flatly, then immediately asked about dinner plans as if nothing significant had been shared. Prepping for the birth of my baby became my new project, as intense as any marketing campaign I'd ever run. I signed up for prenatal classes, eager to learn everything I could about bringing my baby into the world as naturally as possible. Yet every class was a sharp reminder of my solo journey. Couples filled the room, hands entwined, while I sat alone, my chair next to me painfully empty. Jack made excuses for every session. Babe, you know I've got so much on at work, and Mom needs me tonight. Or, I'm just not up for it, you know how these things make me feel. It was always something. Feeling more and more isolated, I threw myself into planning for the birth. I chose a clinic specializing in natural water births, located outside the city, known for its serene environment and expert care. It wasn't cheap, but I had been saving every penny from the rental income of my apartment. This was about bringing my baby safely and peacefully into the world, and I wasn't going to cut corners. One evening, while dining at Maggie's, the conversation inevitably turned to finances. You know, Lucy, I heard those birthing centers cost a fortune. Why waste money when the hospital here does just fine? Maggie said, her tone more accusing than curious. I took a deep breath, trying to keep the irritation from my voice. It's not a waste if it ensures the health and safety of your grandchild, Maggie. I've got it covered. Jack, who had been half listening, suddenly tuned in. Covered? How's that? Well, I've got a reserve account from the apartment rental. It's more than enough to cover the costs, I explained, a bit reluctantly. Maggie's eyes sharpened, her interest visibly piqued. Oh, you've been saving up? That's good foresight. I nodded, feeling their gaze heavy on me, knowing I might have disclosed too much. Quickly, I steered the conversation elsewhere, discussing potential baby names to divert their focus. Despite the ongoing stress, I continued my solo visits to the prenatal classes, each time returning a little more empowered but also a little lonelier. The clinic staff was supportive, and I often stayed back to ask questions about the birth process. Each visit made me more certain of my decision. This was the right place for my baby to come into the world. With the countdown to motherhood ticking ever louder, I decided a short trip to visit my parents in their city was just what I needed. It had been too long since I had surrounded myself with family who were nothing but supportive and loving, a stark contrast to the tense atmosphere back home. My heart felt lighter as I caught up with old school friends and spent precious moments with my grandmother, promising her that my son would bear the name of my late grandfather. But barely a day into my visit, my phone buzzed with a call from Jack, his voice edged with urgency. "Lucy, you need to come back. Now." Panic surged through me. "What's happened? Is everything okay?" "Just come back, okay? It's important," he pressed, hanging up before I could probe further. Worried and confused, I packed up and headed back, my mind racing with possibilities of what could demand such an abrupt end to my visit. As I opened the front door of our home, the sight that greeted me sucked the air right out of my lungs. The house was a disaster zone, empty bottles, pizza boxes strewn across the floor, sticky stains marking the tiles. It looked like the aftermath of a wild party. Jack, smelling of booze and barely standing straight, waved a hand dismissively at the mess. I threw a bash to celebrate the baby coming. "Clean this up, will ya? I can't stand the mess." I stared at him, disbelief and anger swirling inside me. "You called me back for this? To clean up your party? Why couldn't you handle it?" He shrugged, a sloppy grin on his face. "Come on, Lucy. Don't be like that. It was a party for our kid." "A party that I wasn't even here for," I snapped back, my energy draining just thinking about the cleanup ahead. With a heavy heart, I started cleaning. Jack had already stumbled to our room, leaving me to deal with the chaos alone. The physical strain of bending, lifting, and scrubbing was immense, especially being so far along in my pregnancy. By the time I finished, my body ached, and I felt contractions starting, a sharp reminder that the baby was almost here. The next morning, labor kicked in full force. Alone and scared, I called a taxi to take me to the clinic. Jack, barely awake and nursing a hangover, mumbled something about meeting me there later. At the clinic, surrounded by medical staff, but devoid of the emotional support I so desperately needed, I gave birth to a beautiful baby boy. The pain of labor paled in comparison to the ache in my heart from doing it without Jack by my side. He showed up hours later, his congratulations feeling hollow and forced. "I'm here now, huh? Let's just focus on the little guy," he said, avoiding my eyes. The coldness in his voice stung, but nothing hurt more than Maggie's reaction, or lack thereof. When I called her with the news, her response was curt. "A baby shouldn't be shown off until he's at least a month old. Keeps away the bad vibes." Her words, so devoid of warmth, didn't surprise me as much as they should have. In a way, I was relieved. No visits from her meant one less thing to worry about. After what felt like an eternity, I finally brought my baby boy home from the clinic. The quiet of the house was a stark contrast to the chaotic events of the past few weeks. Despite the calm, an undercurrent of tension lingered, especially with Jack's nonchalant revelation that his mother had taken off on a vacation. A few days into adjusting to motherhood, I received the clinic bill. My heart sank when I saw the balance due, $5,000 more than what the insurance covered. Confident about my financial backup, I logged into my account to transfer the funds, only to find the balance shockingly low. Way below what should have been over $50,000. Panic set in, my breaths quick and shallow. Dialing Jack with trembling hands, I braced for his explanation. "Jack, there's hardly any money left in the reserve account." "What happened?" His reply was casual, dismissive almost. "Oh, yeah, Mom needed some cash for her vacation. You know, to unwind and all." "Jack, are you telling me you gave our savings, over $40,000, to your mother? It's our son's future, Jack. How could you?" My voice rose, a mix of disbelief and rising anger. "Babe, come on. You're blowing this out of proportion. And anyway, you stopped cleaning up at Mom's place, she's tired. She deserves some fun," he retorted. That was the final straw. His words echoed in my ears, each one chipping away at the last vestiges of patience I had for this marriage. By evening, I was sitting in front of a lawyer, divorce papers spread out in front of me. When Jack saw the papers, his reaction was not what I expected. No anger, no sadness, just a resigned, almost relieved, "All right then." He signed them with a steady hand, grabbed his coat, and left without another word, heading straight to his mother's place. Feeling a mix of liberation and deep sorrow, I decided it was time for me and my son to leave, at least for a while. We went to my parents' house, where I was greeted with warm hugs and soothing words, a stark contrast to the coldness of my now strained marriage. "Lucy, you need to talk to Jack's brother," my dad suggested one evening. He went through something similar with Maggie. Hesitant but curious, I reached out to Jack's estranged brother. The conversation that unfolded was eye-opening. He told me about how Maggie had tried to control his wife's inheritance, how it tore their marriage apart until he chose his wife over his mother. Maggie had cut all ties with him in retaliation. "Lucy, she won't change. I learned that the hard way. You've got to look out for yourself and your kid," he advised, his voice heavy with the weight of experience. Hanging up, I felt a mix of emotions swirling inside me. Jack had chosen his mother over our family, just as his brother warned might happen. The realization was painful but clear. The final straw had been pulled, the last line crossed. I stood in the police station, a mix of resolve and nervous energy swirling through me as I detailed everything to the officer on duty. My voice was steady, though my hands trembled slightly. My husband transferred money from my account without my knowledge, and I believe he forged my signature to do it. Over the following weeks, a full investigation unfolded. It revealed not only had Jack forged my signature, but he had also given his mother access to the funds. The evidence was undeniable, and eventually, both were charged. In court, Jack's face was unreadable as the judge handed down their sentences. Both received suspended sentences for their crimes. Jack was also ordered to pay alimony for our son, ensuring at least some financial stability for our future. I reached out to the family of Jack's brother, driven by the conversation I had with him. They welcomed me with open arms. It turned out they were nothing like the monsters Maggie had painted them to be. Their warmth and acceptance were a soothing balm to the wounds left by my former in-laws. One sunny Saturday afternoon, as our children played together in the backyard, Jack's brother, Mike, threw a couple of steaks on the grill, and his wife, Sarah, handed me a chilled glass of lemonade. "Lucy, we're just glad you reached out. Mom, she can spin quite the tale," Mike said, flipping the steaks with a practiced flick of his wrist. Watching Danny laugh as he chased after his cousins, a sense of peace settled over me. "Thank you, both. It means the world to us to have family like you." As the kids tumbled around, their laughter filling the air, Mike leaned over and said in a conspiratorial tone, "You know, Mom always did like to be the center of the universe. But around here, it's just simple family life. No drama." "Exactly what we need," I responded, smiling at the simple truth in his words. Our gatherings became a regular thing, our children bonding as cousins do, forming connections that promised to last a lifetime. The holidays were particularly full of joy, the kids' excitement contagious, making each moment a bit brighter. Hi there, I'm Daisy. At 29, I've been around cameras more than people sometimes. They say if you grew up like I did, with parents owning a string of hotels and restaurants, you'd stick to that silver spoon. But not me. I ditched the family business for a camera and nature's own backdrop. Freelancing was my jam, shooting for whoever liked my style, magazines mostly, sometimes ads, you know the deal. So, here's how it all kicked off. My trusty old camera, the one that saw me through countless shoots, finally gave up on me. Kaput. And instead of clicking my way to a quick online fix, I figured I'd hit the local tech shop. Needed to feel the heft of a new camera in my hands before buying. Walking into that tech store was like any other day, except it wasn't. I browsed through the aisles of cameras when this guy, about my age, popped up beside me. "Looking for something specific?" he asked, his tone casual, not the usual sales pitch I expected. "Yeah, something that won't bail on me mid-shot," I replied, half joking. He chuckled. "I get that. What's your focus? Landscape, portraits, street scenes?" "Mostly nature, but I like to mix it up with urban landscapes. Keeps things fresh," I explained, warming up to his genuine interest. Mark, that was his name, walked me through the latest models, explaining specs like he was reciting his favorite book. Not once did he try to shove the priciest tag in my face. It was refreshing. So, what do you think? Willing to take this one for a spin? He gestured towards a sleek model that seemed to fit the bill. Might as well. Can't have my next gig without a reliable sidekick. I grinned, making the decision easier than I thought. Mark processed my purchase, and as he handed over the bag, he tossed in, "Hey, I could use your number. You know, just to make sure everything's working great for you." I laughed, seeing right through his not-so-sly move. Sure, why not? But if I end up with spam texts, you're buying me coffee as compensation. Mark did call, not about the camera, but to ask me out. I said yes. Why not, right? Life's short and all that. After the camera store meet cute, Mark and I were pretty much inseparable. You know how it is when you just click with someone? Yeah, that was us. Always out and about, him with his quirky facts about tech, and me showing him the city through the lens of my camera. One chilly evening about 6 months in, Mark called me up, all excited. "Daisy, pack a bag for the weekend. I've got a surprise." "Mark, I swear if you've signed us up for some weird survival camp, you're sleeping on the couch," I joked, but I was already pulling on my boots. He picked me up in his rickety old Jeep. God, that thing was a death trap, but he loved it, and we headed out of the city. It was one of those drives where the music's playing, but you're both kinda lost in your own thoughts, you know? Excited, a bit nervous, wondering what's up. Turned out, he booked us a little cabin by the lake. Not fancy, but perfect. Just us, the woods, and a sky full of stars. That night, we sat by the fire, roasting marshmallows, the cheap ones that turned perfect golden brown, and I could tell he was itching to say something. "So, Daisy, you know I suck at this kinda stuff," Mark started, poking the fire with a stick. "But, I've been thinking a lot." I raised an eyebrow, munching on a marshmallow. "Thinking can be dangerous, Mark. What's on your mind?" He chuckled, took a deep breath, and then turned to me, his face half lit by the firelight. "I love this, you know? Us. And I'm kinda hoping you do too." I leaned in, nudging his shoulder. "Yeah, I kinda do." He fumbled in his pocket, pulled out a small box, and it hit me. "Oh, this is happening." Mark just went silent, looking serious and kinda scared all at once. "Marry me, Daisy. For real." The box popped open, and there it was. A simple ring, nothing flashy. Just perfect. I didn't expect to, but I laughed. It was either that or cry, right? "Mark, this is the worst proposal ever." "Of course, I will." He grinned, relief washing over him. "Damn, I thought you'd need more convincing. Just promise me no more surprises like this without a warning." "No promises," he teased, slipping the ring on my finger. We spent the rest of the night just sitting there, the fire dying down, talking about what this all meant for us. No big dreams, just real stuff, like whether we should get a new couch or if his Jeep would make it through another winter. The next day, we spent it lazy by the lake, skipping stones, and talking about how to break the news to our families. Mark's a bit estranged from his folks, they're tough nuts, always on about money and whatnot. He warned me they might not take it well, seeing as I wasn't exactly rolling in dough in their eyes. "Let them talk," I said, tossing a stone across the water. "We know what we have, and that's enough." Mark nodded, watching the ripples. "Yeah, it's us against the world, huh?" "Always," I confirmed, knowing it wouldn't be easy, but also that it'd be worth it. Little did I know just how rocky it would get with his family, but for that moment, it was just us and the future. And that was enough. A couple of weeks after Mark popped the question, it was time to meet the infamous in-laws. We drove over to their place on a Sunday. I was a bundle of nerves, fussing over my hair and my clothes, wanting to make a good impression. The moment we stepped through the door, it was like walking into a cold gust. Mark's mom looked me up and down as if I was something the cat dragged in. His dad wasn't much warmer, eyeing us with a skeptical squint that made my stomach knot. "So, Daisy was it?" his mom started, not even a smile. "Who do you work for? What's your salary like?" I blinked, taken aback by the bluntness. I'm a freelance photographer. I work for myself, so my income varies." At that, Mark's sister, who had been lounging on the couch with her phone, looked up and snorted. "Freelance? Sounds like a fancy word for being jobless." Mark could have picked anyone, and he ends up with a beggar from an alley. Their laughter stung, and I felt my face go hot with embarrassment. Mark's hand found mine, giving it a squeeze. "Hey, that's enough," he snapped, his voice firm, more forceful than I'd ever heard it. "I love her, and she's brilliant at what she does. That's all you need to know." His mom rolled her eyes, but dropped the subject. Dinner was a tense affair, with me trying to make polite conversation while dodging snide remarks about my little hobby. It was a relief to finally say our goodbyes. After that disaster, it was my turn to introduce Mark to my parents. We met them at a cozy little cafe downtown, a far cry from the tension at his family's place. My parents were all smiles when we walked in, pulling us into warm hugs. "Mark, we've heard so much about you," my mom gushed, leading him to a table by the window. "We're just ordinary pensioners now," my dad chimed in, his eyes twinkling as he shook Mark's hand. "Used to run a small business back in the day, nothing too grand." He winked at me, a silent promise to keep our little secret just that, a secret. Mark had no idea he was sitting across from two people who could buy his parents' house 10 times over without blinking. And that's how I wanted it, at least for now. "So, Mark, tell us about yourself." "Daisy's told us bits and pieces, but we want to hear it from you," my mom said, her tone inviting. Mark, looking more relaxed than he had in days, launched into his life story, from his struggles with his family's expectations to his dreams of starting his own tech company. My parents listened, nodding and throwing in questions here and there. As we sipped our coffees, it struck me how different this meeting was from the one with his family. No judgment, no prying into personal finances, just genuine interest and acceptance. It was like a balm to the burns of the earlier encounter. When we left the cafe, Mark squeezed my hand. "Your folks are amazing, Daisy." "Thanks for that, I needed it." I smiled up at him, my heart full despite the rocky start to our family introductions. "They love you already, you know." Mark and I wanted a simple wedding. Nothing fancy, just close friends and family, a little chapel, and some good food. That's all we needed to start our life together. But of course, his family had other ideas. From the get-go, his sister sneered at our plans. A modest wedding? More like a beggar's bash, she laughed one evening over dinner at their place, making everyone but Mark chuckle. His mother chimed in, "Really, Mark, you're setting yourself up to look like you can't afford anything better." I tried to keep my cool, focusing on my food. "It's our wedding. We want it to be intimate and personal," I explained, hoping to smooth things over. Mark backed me up. "Daisy's right. It's our day, our way." The wedding day arrived, and it was everything I dreamed of, simple and sweet. But true to form, Mark's mom and sister barely hid their disdain. They didn't mingle with my family, just sat there looking like they'd swallowed lemons. My parents tried to chat with them, but got icy stares in return. After the ceremony, when Mark and I moved into my apartment, that's when the real fun began. His mom and sister started dropping by unannounced, always around mealtime. They'd sit at my table, eating the food I made for us, while throwing digs about how I was living off Mark now. "So, Daisy, still snapping pictures for pennies?" his sister would ask, a smirk playing on her lips. I kept my tone light but firm. "I do well enough. Photography can be pretty lucrative, you know." They exchanged looks, clearly not buying it. One afternoon, his sister, who was supposedly job hunting, asked outright, "Come on, how much do you really make? Enough to keep my brother happy?" Before I could answer, Mark jumped in, his voice tight with annoyance. "That's none of your business." Daisy's not living off me. We're partners. Their visits became more frequent, and his sister's demands grew more audacious. She'd call Mark, right in front of me, asking him to transfer money so she could go out with her friends. "Mark, I'm a bit short this month. Can you throw some cash my way?" she'd say, her voice loud enough for me to hear. Sometimes Mark would give in, sending her money. Other times, he'd refuse, and boy, did she throw a fit. "You're my brother. How can you leave me hanging while you play house with her?" One day, after she stormed out following another of her tantrums about money, I turned to Mark. "We need to set some boundaries. This can't go on." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "I know, Daisy. I'm sorry. It's just hard, you know? They're family." Things between Mark and his family had been teetering on the edge of outright hostility, and it all came crashing down one Sunday dinner at his mother's house. We knew walking into that den was risky, but it was his sister's birthday dinner in a couple of months, and she had her heart set on something pricey. We were barely through the door when his sister launched into her wish list. "Mark, you know what I want for my birthday, right? That designer bag I showed you last week. It's only a little over $1,000. Mark frowned, setting his jaw in that way he does when he's about to lay down the law. "Lisa, we've talked about this. I can't be dropping that kind of money anymore. I'm married now, and we have our own expenses." Lisa's face twisted up like she'd bitten into a lemon. "Oh, come on. Since when do you back down from spoiling your little sis? What, has Daisy got you on a leash now?" The table went quiet. You could have heard a pin drop. I felt every eye on me, especially the burning glare from his mother. Mark shook his head, reaching over to squeeze my hand under the table. "Lisa, no. I'm sorry, but we've made a budget, and we're sticking to it." That set Lisa off. She stood up, knocking her chair back with a loud scrape that made me jump. "This is all your fault," she shrieked at me. "You're just sucking him dry, taking all his money and attention. He used to have enough for me before you." I tried to keep my voice calm, but it was hard. "Lisa, I haven't asked Mark to stop helping you out. We're just being responsible." And with that, his mom chimed in, siding with Lisa as always. "Mark, she's your sister. You can't let her down. What kind of brother are you if you can't help her out?" Mark stood, pulling me up with him. "Enough. We're leaving. I'm not going to justify our personal decisions here." We left amid Lisa's cries and his mom's accusing eyes. It was the last straw. We decided then and there to cut off communication for a while. We needed peace, a break from the drama. So, we packed up a few days later and went on a small trip, just the two of us, to clear our heads. Coming back from that trip felt like a breath of fresh air, until we found out Lisa hadn't given up. She broke into our apartment while we were collecting the last of our things from the car. You think you can just go off on vacations with my brother's money while I get nothing?" Lisa was in my face the second I walked in, her voice so loud it echoed off the walls. "What are you talking about, Lisa? I use my own money for our trips." I tried to keep calm, but seeing her rifling through my closet, throwing my clothes around, made my blood boil. "Lies. All this," she waved at my stuff scattered on the floor, "bought with Mark's money, right? Living the high life while I get scraps." Before I could stop her, she grabbed my new camera from the desk and hurled it to the floor. The crash was like a physical blow. "That's enough," I screamed, my patience snapping. "Get out of our apartment, now." When Mark came back and saw the mess, the broken camera, he was furious. He called Lisa, yelling into the phone while I tried to salvage what I could of my equipment. She hung up on him, but not before hurling a few choice insults. Mark turned to me, his face softening. "I'm so sorry, Daisy. I'll get you a new camera. We'll figure this out." I nodded, too upset to speak. We cleaned up together, the silence between us heavy with unspoken promises to never let his family tear at us like this again. A few weeks after the camera debacle, Mark got a call from Lisa. She was all chirpy, which was a rarity, announcing her birthday bash and, surprise, her engagement. They were celebrating at Monte Cristo's, the fanciest joint in town. Normally, the mention of such a swanky place would have me rolling my eyes, but this time, I couldn't help but smile. Mark noticed and looked puzzled. "What's up? Thought you'd want to steer clear of anything involving Lisa after everything," he said, clearly hesitant. I leaned over, whispering, "Trust me, we need to go to this one. There's a reason." He studied my face for a second, then nodded. "All right, if you say so." The night of the dinner, we dressed up, Mark in a sleek suit that made him look like a movie star, and me in a simple but elegant black dress. As we approached Lisa's reserved area, I spotted the whole clan gathered around a large table, Mark's parents, some aunts and uncles, and Lisa's new fiancé, a slick-looking guy with a too-tight smile. Lisa, spotting us, waved us over with a grin that didn't reach her eyes. "There's the happy couple. Come join us, celebrate my birthday and engagement," she called out, loud enough for nearby tables to glance our way. As we got closer, I noticed there was exactly one chair free. Lisa's eyes twinkled maliciously as she took it all in. Mark's mom, seeing our hesitation, spoke up with a snide tone. "Oh, it seems we're short a chair. This table is for family members, anyway." Lisa chimed in, her voice sugary with malice. "Yeah, Daisy, you can stand or maybe find a spot at the bar." The relatives murmured, some with smirks, others just uncomfortable. Mark was red in the face, fists clenching as he turned to me. "Let's just go. We don't need this." But I put a hand on his arm, shaking my head slightly. "No, let's stay. I want to." He looked confused, but nodded, trusting my judgment. We stood there, by the table, the tension thick. Just when the awkwardness hit its peak, the restaurant manager came bustling over, looking apologetic. "I'm terribly sorry, but it seems we're quite full tonight, no spare chairs available at this moment," he said, his eyes darting between us and the smug faces of Mark's family. Lisa and her mom couldn't hide their glee. Their smiles stretched ear to ear, thinking they had us cornered, standing like fools without a seat. Just as their smiles reached peak smugness, the manager's expression shifted to a warm, familiar smile directed at me. He raised his voice, not obnoxiously loud, but enough to carry over the murmur of the busy restaurant. "However, we do have a VIP table reserved for the daughter of the owner of Monte Cristo's. Miss Daisy, your table is ready." The table went silent. Forks paused midair, and the color drained from Lisa and her mom's faces. Mark looked at me, a mix of shock and awe in his eyes, while the rest of his family seemed to be grappling with this new piece of information. Your dad owns Monte Cristo's?" Mark stuttered, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, giving him a sheepish grin. "I wanted you to love me for me, not for for this." I gestured around the opulent setting of the restaurant. He chuckled, shaking his head in disbelief. "You were right not to tell. God, can you imagine the shopping lists I'd be handed otherwise?" We both laughed, the tension easing as we followed the manager to our VIP table, a beautifully secluded spot with a stunning view of the city skyline. The whispers from Mark's family followed us, their earlier triumph replaced by stunned silence. We had just settled into the comfort of our private table, sipping on champagne that suddenly tasted sweeter, when half an hour later, a sheepish Lisa and her equally embarrassed mom approached us. Their earlier arrogance had evaporated, replaced by awkward shame. "Daisy, we didn't realize, we sort of went overboard with the ordering," Lisa stuttered, not meeting my eyes. "The bill is a bit more than we can handle. Could you, since you're family?" I raised an eyebrow, cutting her off. "Oh, but I thought you said I wasn't really family? You know, at the table earlier?" My voice was calm, but the point hit hard. Her mom chimed in, desperation lacing her tone. "Daisy, please, we just didn't know. Help us out here?" Mark squeezed my hand under the table, a silent signal of support. I looked at them both, their faces a mix of embarrassment and hope, and then back at Mark, who nodded slightly. I think it's best if you handle your own bill tonight, I said firmly. After all, it's important to live within one's means, wouldn't you agree? Lisa's face fell, and her mother's mouth tightened. They turned away without another word, heading back to their table to face the music of their own making. After the big reveal at Monte Cristo's, life took on a new rhythm for Mark and me. His family, once sharp with their words and cold with their actions, switched gears so fast you'd think they'd been fans of mine all along. Their sudden sweetness, all sugar-coated compliments and eager invitations, felt like watching bad actors in a worse play. We weren't buying tickets to that show, though. We kept our distance, content in our own little world. Things got even more interesting when we heard through the grapevine that Lisa's fiancé had called it quits, right after the dinner debacle. "Can't tie myself to that kind of drama," he supposedly said. Can't say I blamed him. Mark and I were at my parents' house when we found out, enjoying one of those perfect afternoons that felt borrowed from a storybook. We were out on the terrace, the city sprawling peacefully below, sipping tea as the sun dipped low. "So, they're trying really hard, huh?" Mark mused, nodding toward his phone, which had been buzzing with texts from his mom. I chuckled, rolling my eyes. "Trying too hard. It's almost embarrassing. But I'm more interested in what's happening with you and my dad." Mark's face lit up, the way it always did when he talked about his dreams. "Your dad's incredible, you know? He offered to fund my startup. Said he's been looking for a new venture and thinks my tech idea has legs." My mom, who had joined us with a fresh pot of tea, smiled knowingly. "We always believed in helping dreams grow. And we believe in you, Mark." He reached over, squeezing her hand gratefully. "Thank you, Ellen. That means more than I can say." The conversation shifted to future plans, dreams of a tech company that could change the small world of ours, and eventually, to the family Mark and I hope to start soon. "You think you're ready for the whole parenting adventure?" my dad asked, a twinkle in his eye. Mark laughed, a sound full of warmth and life. "With Daisy? I'd be ready for anything." And that's how our days went, filled with planning and dreaming. Mark began laying the groundwork for his business, fueled by my dad's support and the freedom of no longer hiding who we were. And as for me, I kept shooting, capturing the world through my lens, only now I sometimes caught glimpses of a future that included a little one tugging at my skirt, asking to see what mommy sees. One quiet evening, as Mark and I lounged on our couch, the city lights twinkling like a promise outside our window, I broached the subject that had been on my mind. "Mark, do you ever think about how crazy it is? How everything turned out?" I asked, tucking my feet under his legs. He chuckled, pulling me closer. "Every day. But I wouldn't change a thing. Not really." "Not even your sister's theatrics?" I teased. "Well, maybe that," he conceded with a grin. "But it brought us here, didn't it? To this moment." The rest of the night was spent making more plans, talking about nursery colors and the kind of parents we wanted to be. It was real, it was ours, and it was just beginning. As we finally turned in, the last thing I saw was the ring on my finger, a glittering reminder of where we'd been and where we were going. And I fell asleep thinking, this, right here, is what happiness feels like. Let me tell you about the time I met my husband, Aaron. It was a regular Tuesday, and I was working at Marigold Fine China and Ceramics, surrounded by fancy dishes and glasses that cost more than my rent. The bell above the door jingled, and in walked a guy who seemed pretty out of place with his casual jeans and a t-shirt that looked like he might have worn it to a concert or something. "Hey, need a hand finding something?" I asked, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear as I approached him. He turned around, and yeah, he was kinda cute, not that I was looking. Yeah, thanks. It's my mom's birthday, and she's big on teapots and all that. I don't know where to start." I showed him around, pointing out some of our best sellers and the finer pieces that would make his wallet cry. He chuckled at my straightforwardness. "So, you're telling me that little pot is worth $1,000, he asked, eyebrow raised as he picked up a delicate teapot painted with roses. "Believe it or not, yeah. It's hand-painted, limited edition, I explained, watching him carefully replace it. We spent a good half-hour chatting as we walked through the aisles. He had a good sense of humor, making jokes about how a single plate cost more than his weekly groceries. "I'm Aaron, by the way," he said, extending his hand. "Elise," I replied, shaking his hand. "So, Aaron, picked any favorites yet?" He nodded towards a set with gold trim and a subtle floral pattern. "That one? It's beautiful, and I think my mom would love it." "Does it come with a don't break me guarantee?" I laughed, shaking my head. "Afraid not. But it does come with a pretty fancy box." While I wrapped up his purchase, he glanced at his phone, then looked up at me. "Hey, this might sound weird, but can I have your number? You've been really helpful, and, I don't know, maybe I could get your advice on something else?" "Like what? More teapots?" I joked, handing him his bag. "Or maybe just a cup of coffee," he countered with a smile. I wrote down my number, still thinking he was just being polite. Guys like him didn't really go for girls like me, ones who spent their days selling overpriced china to people who had too much money. But the next morning, he called. The coffee date with Aaron wasn't just coffee. Turned out, the guy had a knack for making me laugh, and before we knew it, we were grabbing dinner instead of just a caffeine fix. "So, Elise, tell me something. How does someone with a no-bullshit attitude end up selling fancy plates to rich folks?" Aaron asked as he sipped his coffee, watching me over the rim of his cup. I shrugged, poking at my salad. "Gotta pay the bills somehow. Plus, it's kind of fun watching people freak out over which set of plates will impress their snooty friends more." He laughed, that hearty kind of laugh that made you want to join in. "Fair enough. You're pretty down to earth. I like that." The conversation flowed as easily as the coffee. We talked about everything, movies, books, our crazy families. He shared stories about his job as an architect, and I told him about my dreams of maybe opening a little cafe someday. "Wait, you cook?" he asked, eyebrows raised. "More like I bake. Cupcakes, pies, you name it. My grandma taught me," I confessed. "Damn, a baker and a plate expert? That's some combo." It felt good, you know? Being with someone who got my kind of humor and didn't expect me to be anything but myself. We started seeing each other more and more after that night, movies, walks in the park, the occasional concert when we felt like splurging. One evening, a few months in, we were at his place, a modest but cozy apartment he'd designed himself. We were on the couch, a movie forgotten on the TV as we talked about our days. Today was nuts. This lady spent an hour deciding between two identical teapots. I mean, they were literally the same, Aaron. How does that even happen? I vented, still amused by the absurdity of it. He grinned, pulling me closer. Maybe she was just trying to make a perfect choice. Kind of like how I feel with you. That caught me off guard, and I looked up at him, trying to figure out if he was joking. But he was serious. "What do you mean?" "I mean, every day with you feels like I'm making the right choice. No second guessing, no regrets. It's easy with you, Elise." It wasn't just the words, but the way he said them, like it was the simplest truth in his world. That night, we kissed for the first time, right there on that couch, and it felt like everything just clicked. Months flew by, and soon a year had passed. Aaron and I were inseparable, and I knew I was falling hard. It was on our first anniversary that he surprised me. We went back to the same coffee shop where we'd had our first date. "Elise, I've got something for you," he said, handing me a small, beautifully wrapped box. Inside was a key. I looked up at him, puzzled. "It's a key to my apartment. I want you to move in, if you're up for it," he explained, his eyes searching mine for any hint of hesitation. I didn't need to think twice. Yes, I'd love to. And just like that, we started a new chapter together. Life with Aaron was as natural as breathing. He never made me feel like just a girlfriend, I was his partner, his equal. We had our moments, sure, like any couple. But even when we argued, it was never long before one of us was cracking a joke, breaking the tension. He loved my baking, always praising even my most disastrous attempts. "Elise, you could burn water, and I'd still eat it," he'd tease, and I'd throw a dish towel at him, laughing. That's how it was with us. No pretenses, no drama, just two people who got each other, building a life together one day at a time. When Aaron proposed, it was simple, no big dramatic gesture, just us on the couch with a ring and him saying, "So, you want to make this official or what?" I laughed and said yes, 100 times yes. The wedding planning flew by, thanks mostly to his mom, Judy, who was a saint. She helped me pick out the dress, the flowers, everything. Aaron's dad, Mike, was seriously ill with cancer, but he was hell-bent on being there. "Wouldn't miss seeing you in that dress for the world," he joked with a wink that made me blush and laugh. The big day was a blur of smiles and tears. Mike, pale but smiling, managed to make it. Every moment felt like something out of a dream, except for Aaron's sister, Claire. She was there, all right, dressed to the nines, and looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. During the reception, I caught her eye, and she just rolled hers, whispering something to her husband who looked just as uncomfortable. It stung, but I wasn't about to let her ruin my day. After the wedding, things settled down. Or at least, they should have. I got on famously with Judy. We'd go shopping, walk around the neighborhood, or I'd just come over and help her around the house. It was during one of these days that Claire's true colors showed even brighter. One evening, we were all at Judy's for dinner. The house smelled like roast beef and the laughter was plenty, except from Claire, who seemed to have her nose turned up at everything. "Elise, dear, can you pass the salt?" Judy asked, her smile warm. As I reached over, Claire muttered loud enough for just me to hear, "Still playing the doting daughter-in-law? Trying to butter her up for the will, are you?" I paused, my hand mid-air, then passed the salt to Judy. "I'm just here to help, Claire. You should try it sometime." She scoffed, sipping her wine. "I don't need to try anything. I'm not the one who came from a little shop, trying to play high society." Her words were like a slap, but I bit back the anger. Aaron squeezed my knee under the table, his way of saying he was there for me. Later, when Judy went to bed, Aaron confronted Claire. "What's your problem with Elise? She's done nothing but good for Mom." Claire's face hardened. "You're blind, Aaron. She's here for what she can get. That's what these people do." "These people?" I snapped, unable to hold back. "You mean people who work for a living?" "Yeah, I was a saleswoman. So what? At least I'm not pretending to be something I'm not." Aaron stood up, his chair scraping back. "That's enough, Claire. If you can't be civil, maybe you shouldn't come around as much." Claire stormed out, her husband trailing behind her, throwing apologetic glances our way. Aaron and I cleaned up in silence. The next few months were tough. Mike's health declined rapidly. Despite the strain and sorrow, I tried to be there for Judy as much as I could. Mike passed away quietly one night, leaving us all a bit emptier. Aaron took it hard, and I did my best to support him, to be his rock. Claire, who'd been absent more often than not, suddenly turned up again, her eyes scanning the house like she was taking inventory. At Mike's funeral, she was tearful, playing the part of the grieving daughter, but her tears seemed as hollow as her previous accusations against me. A few weeks after Mike passed, Judy decided it was time to settle his affairs once and for all. She invited us all to dinner. As we sat around the dining table, the air thick with anticipation, Judy cleared her throat and unfolded a stack of papers. "I've got Mike's will here," Judy announced, her voice steady but soft. "He had some specific wishes about how things should be handled." Judy continued, "Half of everything goes to me, as we expected. The other half will be divided among Mike's future grandchildren." She paused, looking over her glasses. "And the firstborn grandson will receive a bonus of $200,000. Claire was practically vibrating in her seat. "Well, I guess that sets our priorities, huh?" she said, half joking but with a greed I hadn't seen so openly before. Let's not make hasty decisions, her husband muttered, but Claire was already on a roll. This means we start trying seriously, babe. It's important, she insisted, her voice tinged with desperation that didn't suit the dinner table. From then on, Claire's obsession with conceiving became the focal point of her life. Every family gathering, she'd update us on their progress, or lack thereof, with a frankness that bordered on uncomfortable. We've been to 3 specialists this month alone, Claire complained one evening as we all tried to enjoy a quiet dinner. Do you have any idea how much this is costing us? Her fixation deepened when they moved on to artificial insemination. The hormonal treatments took a toll on her, physically and emotionally. She gained weight, which only fueled her frustration and desperation. Her struggles cast a shadow over our family meetings. Claire's obsession with getting pregnant overshadowed even simple conversations. It got to the point where I found excuses not to attend gatherings, especially if I knew she'd be there in one of her moods. Aaron tried to stay neutral, but even he was wearing thin. She's my sister, but I can't deal with this every time we see them, he confessed one night as we lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. I know, love. Maybe give her some space? She's got a lot on her plate right now with all the treatments and pressure, I suggested, though I felt for Claire, her behavior made it hard to be around her. As time wore on, Claire's single-minded pursuit of motherhood began to isolate her, even from those who wanted to support her. All we could do was watch and wait, hoping that something would give, for better or worse. The day Claire announced her pregnancy should have been purely joyful. I'm pregnant, she declared during a family brunch, her eyes scanning the table for our reactions. Aaron and I offered our genuine congratulations. That's great news, Claire. Really happy for you guys, Aaron said, passing her a smile across the table. I nodded in agreement, trying to add warmth to the tense air. Despite our attempts at keeping things friendly, Claire seemed to brew a storm inside her, always ready to snap. Her mood swings were wild, and every small thing set her off. The family tiptoed around her, but I bore the brunt of her sharp tongue more than anyone else. I learned to keep my distance, but that was about to become harder. One morning, feeling unusually queasy, I took a pregnancy test. The positive result left me stunned and elated. I shared the news with Aaron, who was over the moon. We're going to have a baby, I whispered, and we held each other, lost in our little bubble. We decided to share the news with Judy first, hoping for a moment of happiness amid the ongoing tensions. Walking into Judy's house, hand in hand, we found not only Judy, but also Claire, who'd apparently come over earlier. Mom, Elise has something to tell you, Aaron began, his voice filled with pride. I smiled, a bit nervous about Claire's presence. I'm pregnant, Judy. We just found out. Judy's face lit up with delight. Oh, my darlings, that's wonderful. 2 grandchildren on the way. But Claire's reaction was far from congratulatory. Her face drained of color, and her lips thinned. You planned this, didn't you? She hissed, her voice low and menacing. Trying to steal my thunder and my child's inheritance. I froze, shocked by her accusation. Claire, that's not true. It just happened. Her voice escalated, and she stood, pointing a shaking finger at me. You're lying. This is all a setup. You want the money, that's all you've ever wanted. We should get a DNA test on that baby. Who knows if it's even Aaron's? Aaron stepped between us, his face dark with anger. Enough, Claire. I won't let you insult my wife like that. You owe Elise an apology. Claire scoffed, her cheeks flushed with anger or shame, I couldn't tell. I'm not feeling well, she muttered, grabbing her purse and storming out, leaving a stunned silence behind. Judy reached for my hand, her eyes sympathetic. Don't mind her, dear. It's just the hormones and jealousy speaking. I tried to smile, but Claire's words had cut deep. Tears spilled over, and I wiped them angrily. I just don't understand why she has to be so cruel, I murmured. The joy of our announcement had been overshadowed by Claire's outburst, and though Judy tried to smooth things over, the damage was done. The remainder of our visit was spent discussing baby names and plans, but Claire's shadow hung over us all. Judy called me up early on a bright Tuesday morning, her voice warm and inviting. "Elise, dear, why don't you come over for coffee? I baked your favorite apple pie," she said, and I could almost smell the sweet aroma through the phone. Glad for a reason to get out of the house, I quickly agreed. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, Judy." "Can't wait." When I arrived, the house smelled heavenly, and Judy greeted me with a hug. Inside, to my surprise, Claire was there too, looking unusually quiet and almost shy. She even managed a small smile as I walked in. "Elise, I want to apologize for last time," Claire said, her voice lower than usual. I was out of line. I've been dealing with a lot. Her apology, unexpected as it was, eased a bit of the tension I'd been carrying around. "Thanks, Claire. Let's just move forward, okay?" We settled at the kitchen table, the pie between us, its scent filling the room, inviting us to forget the awkwardness. Judy poured the coffee, and we started to chat about light, inconsequential things, Judy's garden, the weather, the little one on the way. Halfway through our second slice of pie, a headache began to pound at my temples, a common annoyance during my pregnancy. I must have winced, because Judy immediately noticed. "You okay, dear? You look a bit pale." "Just a headache, nothing new these days," I replied, trying to brush it off with a smile. "Oh, I have just the thing," Judy said, rising from her seat. "I have some headache medicine that's safe for pregnancy." "Claire, honey, could you fetch it?" "It's in the medicine cabinet." Claire nodded and left to retrieve it, returning moments later with a pill and a glass of water. "Here you go, Elise. This should help." I thanked her, swallowing the pill without a second thought, trusting Judy to know what was safe. But as I took the glass back to the kitchen to rinse it out, my eyes caught on something in the trash that sent a cold shiver down my spine. Among the usual rubbish, a discarded medicine package stood out, its label stark against the banana peels and coffee grounds. It was a chemotherapy drug, one that I instantly recognized from the time we had helped Mike through his treatments. Panic seized me as I remembered the clear warnings about its effects on pregnancy. Dropping the glass in the sink, I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. The operator picked up immediately, and I quickly explained what had happened. "Ma'am, you need to try to purge that from your system immediately. Drink water and try to induce vomiting," the dispatcher instructed urgently. I turned the tap on full blast, gulping down glass after glass of water before kneeling in front of the toilet. As I forced myself to vomit, tears mixed with fear and betrayal stung my eyes. What was going on? How had this happened? My head was spinning, not just from the physical effort, but from the shock and betrayal I felt swirling inside me. When I finally managed to stagger out of the bathroom, the sight of Judy and Claire standing there, pale and confused, only intensified my feelings of unease. "What on earth is going on, Elise?" Judy's voice was filled with worry. Claire, on the other hand, looked like she was seeing a ghost, her face drained of all color. "I found something in the trash," I managed to say between gasps. It was Mike's chemotherapy drugs." "Claire, did you give me those?" Before Claire could respond, I heard sirens outside. The EMTs burst through the door, their presence a small comfort in the chaos. As they started to check on me, I dialed Aaron's number with trembling fingers. "Aaron, I need you here," I choked out as soon as he answered. He was at my side within minutes, his face etched with concern. "What happened?" he demanded, looking from me to his sister and mother. I think Claire gave me something dangerous. Not just a headache pill. I found the chemo meds in the trash right after taking what she gave me," I explained hurriedly. Claire's reaction was immediate and defensive. "You're being dramatic, Elise. I just gave you what Mom told me to. Why would I do something to hurt you?" But her words didn't sit right with anyone, not with the evidence of the discarded medication packaging that was strictly for cancer treatment. Judy, struggling to keep up, finally said, "I told her to give you paracetamol, I swear." Claire, please tell me you didn't. Why are we even discussing this? She's just trying to get attention. Claire interrupted, her voice rising in panic. That's when Aaron stepped in, his tone icy. We're calling the police. We need to sort this out properly. Claire paled even further, if that was possible. The police? Aaron, come on, think this through. She's making a mistake. But it was too late. Aaron had already dialed, and within moments, the police arrived, adding another layer of seriousness to the situation. They listened to our accounts, their expressions grim. Ma'am, we'll need to take that package of medicine for fingerprints, one of the officers said after I pointed out the trash where I had seen the discarded drugs. Claire seemed to shrink with every word the police said, her earlier bravado draining away as quickly as her color. Meanwhile, the ambulance team decided I needed to be at the hospital for a thorough checkup and possibly more treatments to ensure no residue of the harmful drug was left in my system. It was a surreal couple of days following the hospital scare. Sitting in the living room, still trying to wrap my mind around the recent events, the phone rang. Aaron answered it, his face tightening as he listened. When he hung up, he looked at me with a mix of relief and sorrow. They arrested Claire, he said quietly. Her fingerprints were all over the medication package. I felt a chill run down my spine. What did she say? She claimed she'd touched those meds before, just moving them around in Dad's room. Aaron continued, rubbing his forehead in frustration. But Mom told the police that wasn't possible. She said those meds were kept in a locked cabinet ever since Dad got sicker. Claire never had access until that day. A few days later, we found ourselves in a courtroom, the air thick with tension. Claire looked pale, her eyes darting around nervously. During the trial, the truth spilled out in the ugliest of ways. Under the pressure, Claire confessed. She admitted to trying to harm our unborn child to ensure her position in the inheritance queue. The courtroom was in shock. To make matters even more shocking, it emerged that Claire wasn't even pregnant. She had fooled everyone with a prosthetic belly, plotting to eventually adopt a child from another state to pass off as her own. Her deception ran deep, and even her husband was kept in the dark, told that their non-existent intimate life during her pregnancy was to protect the baby. Thankfully, the doctors confirmed that my quick actions had prevented any harm to our baby. Claire was found guilty and sentenced to 3 years in prison. Judy, with tears in her eyes, requested the court to adjust Mike's will, cutting Claire out completely. The judge agreed, and just like that, Claire's ties to her father's legacy were severed. Her husband, unable to stomach her betrayal, filed for divorce. Even Judy, who had always tried to see the best in her daughter, couldn't find it in herself to forgive Claire's actions. Months later, our lives took a happier turn. I gave birth to a healthy, beautiful boy, who had my eyes and Aaron's smile. He was our miracle after a storm, a sign that life could indeed be beautiful. According to Mike's will, he received the promised $200,000, which we decided to save for his education. One morning, sitting back, I watched our son play, his laughter filling the room, a stark contrast to the darkness we had faced. Aaron wrapped his arms around us, a silent vow that as long as we were together, nothing could break us. Everything ended well, didn't it? I murmured, leaning back against him. It did, he confirmed, kissing the top of my head. It really did. And in that moment, I knew that no matter what came our way, the love of our little family would always be our strength. We had weathered the storm, and now it was time to enjoy the calm. I wiped down the last table at Joe's Cafe, glancing at the clock that ticked steadily towards my freedom for the night. The diner's neon sign buzzed in the evening calm, a beacon for the occasional late-night wanderer looking for a cup of joe or a piece of pie. My apron, splattered with today's special, felt heavier with each passing minute. My shift was finally ending, and the real work, the kind that fueled my dreams, was about to begin. Mama, I'm heading out to the Rusty Nail. They asked me to do a couple of sets tonight. I called, my voice echoing slightly in the now empty cafe. From the back, amidst the clatter of dishes, Mom's voice came, tired yet always supportive. Sing like the angels, Elena. Make em listen. Inside the rusty nail, the atmosphere was a stark contrast to the biting cold outside. The warmth of dim lights and the murmur of scattered conversations welcomed me like an old friend. I headed straight to the tiny stage that was more an afterthought than a feature. The owner, a burly man with a smile that could light up the room, gave me a nod. Got a good crowd tonight, Luna. Some big shot producers amongst them. Make it count. Luna. The name still felt new, but Mr. Carter, the producer who'd taken a chance on me a few days back, insisted it was sonorous and memorable. He was in the crowd tonight, his sharp eyes missing nothing. The set started off with some of my favorites, the notes of each song weaving through the smoky air, creating a tapestry of sound that seemed to hold the room in a trance. I poured every ounce of my soul into the lyrics, each word a testament to the years of dreaming and striving. Halfway through a particularly heartfelt ballad, I caught Mr. Carter's eye. He was nodding slightly, the ghost of a smile playing on his lips. After my set, I made my way to his table, my heart pounding not from the singing but from what this conversation could mean. Elena, you were phenomenal, Mr. Carter said, his voice smooth like aged whiskey. That voice of yours needs bigger stages. I blushed, tucking a loose strand of hair behind my ear. Thank you, Mr. Carter. I'm just glad to have the gigs. He slid a card across the table. I want you to join a course at my vocal school. Sharpen those raw edges. And then, who knows? Maybe open for some big names? As I walked home later, under the speckled canvas of the night sky, every step felt lighter. I was going to work harder, shine brighter. Mr. Carter believed in Luna, but more importantly, I believed in myself. Ever since Mr. Carter roped me into this whirlwind of vocal drills and endless rehearsals, my life's been nothing short of a mad dash from one microphone to the next. The vocal school was tougher than anything I'd ever faced. Every day was a grind, but every note I belted out made me feel like I was inching closer to something big, something life-changing. Elena, you're flat on the high C. Again. Focus, barked Mr. Jennings, the vocal coach who had a way of making you feel like you were back in grade school. Sorry, I got it this time. Just, give me a sec, I replied, wiping the sweat from my brow and squaring my shoulders. Take 5, everyone. But not you, Luna. Let's get this right, he commanded, not even looking up from his clipboard. As everyone else scattered toward the break room, I took a deep breath and prepared myself for another go. Mr. Jennings played the piano keys, giving me the cue. Hold it, there. That's it, Luna. Why can't you hit it like that every time? He said, a rare smile breaking through his usually stern demeanor. Just needed to warm up, I guess, I shot back with a grin, feeling a mix of relief and pride swelling inside me. Back in the break room, a couple of other students were huddled around a table, their eyes glued to their phones. That was some note you hit there, Luna. Bet you could shatter glass with that, joked Alex, a fellow student with a knack for making everyone laugh. Yeah, well, I'd settle for shattering expectations, I quipped, grabbing a water bottle from the fridge. The conversation turned to the upcoming showcase, where we were all supposed to demonstrate what we'd learned. It was a big deal, with scouts and agents in the audience. Just thinking about it made my stomach do flips. You ready for the showcase, Luna? Heard some big names might be dropping by, said Alex, his tone turning serious. Ready as I'll ever be. Just gotta keep my cool and show 'em what I'm made of, I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. The day of the showcase arrived faster than a freight train. Backstage, the air was thick with nerves and hairspray. Stepping out onto the stage, the lights blinded me for a moment. I could see shadows of people out in the audience, some shifting in their seats, others silent in anticipation. The music started, and for a moment, everything else faded away. It was just me and the song. I poured every ounce of emotion I had into the lyrics, letting the melody lift me higher and higher until the final note hung in the air like a promise. The applause that followed was deafening. I couldn't help but smile, basking in the sound of it all. As I walked off the stage, Mr. Carter was waiting in the wings, his usual stern expression replaced with something softer, something akin to pride. As I changed back into my regular clothes and prepared to leave, my phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "Heard your showcase went great. So proud of you. Love you." Smiling, I typed back, "Thanks, Mom. Couldn't have gotten here without you. Love you more." Walking out into the night, the air felt different, lighter somehow, as if the evening itself was whispering of bigger stages and brighter lights just on the horizon. Life on the stage was like nothing else, and I was finally living it, big time. Mr. Carter had me opening for names that once felt like they belonged in a different universe. Each concert, each crowd was bigger, louder, more thrilling than the last. Then, at a charity gig decked out with chandeliers and swanky suits, I met David. He was one of those patrons, the kind you know have more money than they know what to do with, but he was different. He actually listened, really listened, when I sang. After my set, we got to talking and something just clicked. "Hey, you really stole the show tonight," he said, his smile easy, his eyes kind. "Thanks, I guess I just tried to give it my all," I replied, trying to sound more casual than I felt. We started seeing each other, and it wasn't long before it turned into something real, something deep. On our 1-year anniversary, he took me to this little secluded spot overlooking the city, got down on one knee, and popped the question. My heart nearly burst out of my chest. "Yes. Of course, yes." I blurted out before he even finished asking. It was like a fairy tale, at least until the day he decided it was time I met his parents. The nerves I felt performing in front of thousands didn't come close to the anxiety of meeting David's mother. The way she looked me up and down when David introduced me, it was clear she had already formed her opinion before even a hello. "So, Elena, David tells me you're a singer. At restaurants, is it?" Her voice dripped with something colder than disdain. "Yes, Mrs. Westwood. I perform at various venues," I responded, trying to keep my voice steady. David squeezed my hand under the table, a silent plea for me to stay cool. "Well, I suppose we all do what we can with what we're given," she sighed, as if the weight of the world was on her shoulders just thinking about my upbringing. David's father, Mr. Westwood, was a stark contrast. He arrived a few days later from a business trip, and right away, he was warm and engaging. "Elena has quite the voice, Dad. She's opened for some pretty big names." David beamed, proud as could be. "That's fantastic. Music's a tough field. Takes a lot of grit," Mr. Westwood replied, his nod filled with a respect that felt like a balm to the burn Mrs. Westwood had left. But the relief was short-lived. Mrs. Westwood's comments grew sharper, more frequent. "One must wonder how a young lady gets so far in such an industry. Surely not by keeping her virtue intact," she once remarked during a dinner, her words slicing through the air like a knife. I felt my face go hot, my hands clench into fists under the table. "Mr. Carter has been nothing but a mentor to me, Mrs. Westwood." "Oh, come now, dear. We all know how these things work. A girl without a father figure is often looking for one, isn't she?" She chuckled, as if it was just a bit of harmless fun. Her refusal to see me as worthy gnawed at me, her words echoing in my head long after they were spoken. But David stood by me, his love unwavering. "Don't listen to her, Elena. You're amazing, and that's all that matters." I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. But as we started planning our wedding, Mrs. Westwood's shadow loomed large, making me wonder if I'd ever really be part of their family. The morning of my wedding, I woke up with a belly full of butterflies and a heart overflowing with love. David and I had poured our souls into every detail of the wedding. It was the day we had both been dreaming of. The venue was draped in delicate whites and soft pinks, every petal and candle placed with care. It was perfect, just like I'd always imagined. As I slipped into my dress, a stunning number that made me feel like a star in one of those fancy romance flicks, I couldn't help but catch my mom's teary-eyed smile in the mirror. The ceremony started with a swell of music, and as I walked down the aisle, all eyes on me, I saw David at the altar, looking like he'd won the lottery. My nerves settled, replaced by a fierce joy. This was it. This was our moment. As we stood before the priest, hand in hand, the traditional question came. If anyone has any reason why these two should not be married, speak now or forever hold your peace. The silence that followed was expected. What wasn't expected was the sharp click of a heel and a voice that cut through the quiet like a knife. I have something to say. It was Mrs. Westwood, standing up in her finery, her face set in a mask of disapproval. Murmurs swirled through the gathered crowd as she started her tirade. This girl, Elena, is nothing but an uneducated dropout who grew up without a father. Her mother conceived her with the first man she met. Do we even know his name? The room went dead quiet, every word from her lips a slap to my face. I felt David's grip tighten around my hands, his jaw clenched. She barely scraped through school, and sings at night in eateries, in front of all sorts of men. This is not the kind of woman fit for our family, Mrs. Westwood declared, her voice ringing in the hall. Before I could shrink away, David stepped forward, his voice firm and loud. Mom, stop. I love Elena. Her past doesn't matter to me. I know her heart, her strength, and her character. That's the woman I chose to marry. His words seemed to silence the room even further, if that was possible. Mrs. Westwood looked stunned, her mouth snapping shut as she realized her son was not on her side this time. The priest cleared his throat. Shall we continue? With a nod from us both, the ceremony went on, but the poison of her words lingered, making my hands tremble and my heart race. It wasn't until the music started for our first dance that I felt a shift. David pulled me close, his hand warm on my back. Forget everyone else. It's just you and me now, he murmured as we swayed to the music. The first dance with David was like a dream. As we glided across the floor, his promises still echoing in my heart, I almost believed that the worst was over. As the last note of our song faded, Mrs. Westwood, flushed from too much champagne, stumbled to the center of the room, grabbing a microphone from the DJ. Such a lovely tradition, the father-daughter dance. Pity we won't see one tonight, eh? She slurred, her voice dripping with mockery. A hush fell over the room. I felt every eye on me, the weight of their stares like a blanket of ice. David's grip tightened on my hand, his whisper urgent. Ignore her, Elena, please. Before I could even muster a response, the side door creaked open, and a man, disheveled and dirty, staggered into the spotlight. My heart sank as Mrs. Westwood's cruel laughter cut through the stunned silence. Look here, perhaps this is Elena's father ready for their dance, she jeered. The room erupted in confused murmurs, some gasps, others hushed whispers. I felt my cheeks burn, my eyes stinging with unshed tears. I covered my face, unable to bear the spectacle. Suddenly, the sharp clack of heels announced my mother's arrival on the stage. Her voice, usually so gentle, was steel as she confronted Mrs. Westwood. This isn't a joke, Diane. You've gone too far. Apologize to my daughter, now. Mom demanded, her presence commanding silence. Mrs. Westwood, swaying slightly, just scoffed, her sneer evident even through her slurred words. Oh, come off it, it's just a bit of fun. Lighten up. That's when Mr. Westwood, who had been silent until now, stepped forward, his face dark with anger. Diane, enough. What are you thinking? He turned to the audience, his voice carrying a mix of embarrassment and authority. This man is an actor, hired by my wife as a distasteful joke. I apologize to everyone here, especially to Elena and her family. He then turned sharply to his wife. You need to leave, now. With a huff, Mrs. Westwood tossed the microphone down and stormed out, her exit as dramatic as her antics. As the door slammed behind her, the tension seemed to deflate slightly, and Mom came over to me, pulling me into a tight embrace. It's okay, baby. Let's not let her ruin your day, she whispered, smoothing back my hair as I fought to regain my composure. You all right to keep going? David asked, his eyes searching mine for any sign of retreat. I nodded, wiping my eyes. Yeah, let's finish this. For us. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of dances, toasts, and laughter, so much so that by the end of the night, I had almost forgotten the cruel stunt Mrs. Westwood had pulled. Almost, but not quite. Every now and then, the memory would resurface, a sharp stab reminding me that despite the beautiful vows and the joyous celebration, a shadow lingered over our new beginning. Ever since the wedding, Mrs. Westwood had been quieter, but a tiger doesn't change its stripes overnight. When she called me about a charity event she was organizing, her voice had that same old chill. "Elena, you should come to the charity concert next weekend. There will be some truly talented singers there. It might be educational for you," she said, her words dripping with that familiar condescension. I bit my tongue to keep from snapping back. "Sounds lovely, Diane. Who's performing?" She hesitated, a scoff hidden just beneath her breath. "Oh, various artists. I can't quite remember all their names." Typical Diane, setting the stage to belittle me. But I played along. "Well, I'd love to attend. Thanks for the invitation." That very night, Mr. Carter, my producer, called with some interesting news. "Luna, you're set to perform at a charity event next Saturday. It's a big gig, lots of high rollers." I paused, a slow grin spreading across my face as I connected the dots. This wouldn't happen to be the Westwood charity concert, would it? "That's the one. How'd you guess?" Mr. Carter chuckled on the other end. "Just a lucky guess," I replied, my mind already ticking. "Carter, let's keep it under wraps that Luna is actually Elena Westwood, okay? I want it to be a surprise." He laughed, clearly amused by the idea. "You got it, Luna. They'll only see your stage name." The night of the concert, the venue was buzzing with the city's elite, all finely dressed and ready to be entertained. Mrs. Westwood was fluttering around like a peacock, greeting donors and flashing her insincere smiles. As I arrived, hidden behind the stage, I could hear her addressing the crowd. "Thank you all for coming tonight. Your generosity supports a great cause. And now, please welcome the sensational Luna." The crowd clapped politely, some craning their necks to see the rising star Mrs. Westwood had boasted about. I took a deep breath and stepped into the spotlight. The hush that fell was delicious. As the first few notes of the song filled the air, I began to sing, pouring every ounce of my passion into the words. From the corner of my eye, I saw Mrs. Westwood's rigid posture falter. She fumbled with her phone, probably texting Mr. Carter in a panic. When the song ended, the applause was thunderous. I took my bow, my heart soaring as the applause washed over me. It wasn't just a performance, it was a victory. Stepping off stage, I caught snippets of conversations, praises mingled with surprise. "Wasn't that Elena Westwood? Diane's daughter-in-law?" "Yes, the very one. Who would have thought?" Mrs. Westwood cornered me backstage, her face a mask of fury barely contained. "What is this stunt? You embarrassed me in front of all my guests." I met her glare with a calm I didn't feel. "Diane, I was invited to sing. I just did my job. You said yourself you wanted to hear from talented singers." Her lips thinned into a line, and for a moment, I thought she might cause another scene. But she turned on her heel and stormed off instead. After my performance, David and I stood hand in hand, soaking in the success of the evening. My heart was still racing from the thrill of it all, but that high crashed down when Mrs. Westwood took the stage again. Her face twisted with disdain, she grabbed the microphone from the MC. "While the voice may be delightful, let's not forget who we're applauding," she sneered, her voice echoing through the hall. "This famous singer, ladies and gentlemen, is nothing but a bastard born of unknowns, and it's my duty to remind her fans of her true origins." The crowd murmured, the atmosphere thickening with tension. I felt my face drain of color, anger seething within me. Before I could react, my mom stepped onto the stage, elegant and composed, flanked by a man I'd never seen, a bit older than David. "Enough, Diane." Mom's voice was calm, but carried an undeniable edge. "I've had enough of your humiliations toward me and my daughter. It's time some truths came to light." She paused, giving the man next to her a nod. He stepped forward, an envelope in hand. After Elena's wedding, I hired a detective. We discovered some intriguing facts about Diane here. Mom continued, her eyes locked on Mrs. Westwood, who paled under the scrutiny. Years ago, Diane got pregnant by her boyfriend, who promptly abandoned her. Alone and desperate, she met her future husband online. Pretending to want a long correspondence, she actually planned to give up her baby at birth. The murmurs grew louder, the guests shifting uncomfortably as they absorbed the gravity of Mom's words. But fate intervened, Mom said. She kept the baby and met her husband, never revealing her past. The man beside Mom stepped forward, his voice steady but filled with emotion. I am that baby. Diane is my mother, abandoned me, and I was raised by foster parents. All my life, I've dreamed of meeting her, my biological mother. He held up the envelope. This DNA test confirms everything. Diane, you are my mother, and David is my brother. The hall erupted into whispers and gasps. Mrs. Westwood's face crumpled, her usual poise crumbling as the reality of her deceit was laid bare for all to see. Mr. Westwood, who had been standing off to the side, his expression unreadable, finally spoke, his voice booming over the noise. I can't believe this, Diane. To think you've lied about something so fundamental. I need time to think about all of this. Mr. Westwood turned and left the hall, his shoulders heavy. The crowd's buzzing grew louder, filled with indignation and shock at the duplicity of Mrs. Westwood. Amidst the chaos, she fled the room, her departure as dramatic as her life had been deceptive. Mr. Carter, who had been watching from the sidelines, approached us, a supportive smile on his face. Elena, why don't you give us one more song? One about honesty and love, perhaps? Nodding, I took the stage again. The opening notes of the song filled the room, a melody about truth and the courage it takes to face it. As I sang, the earlier tension dissipated, replaced by a collective catharsis. The applause at the end was overwhelming, not just for the performance, but for the truth. As it rang out, I saw my mom wiping away tears of pride. After the fiasco that blew up at the charity event, things changed drastically for everyone involved. Mrs. Westwood, once the queen bee of her social circles, found herself isolated after the divorce. Mr. Westwood couldn't see past the deception, and he ended their marriage, leaving her with nothing but a modest allowance. I heard through the grapevine that her former friends turned their backs, snubbing her from gatherings and charity events that she once dominated. It's like she vanished from the social scene entirely. Meanwhile, my career took off in ways I never imagined. The scandal put the spotlight on me, and not just as a singer. People were touched by the story, by the struggle and the strength it took to face down such public betrayal. Mr. Carter called me about starting my first album. Luna, it's time to channel all this into your music. Are you ready to start on your album? He said over the phone, his voice brimming with excitement. You bet I am, Carter. Let's show them what I'm made of, I replied, feeling the fire of anticipation lighting up inside me. In the middle of all this, David and his newfound brother, Michael, grew close. It was a silver lining in a very dark cloud. They met up often, finding comfort and understanding in their shared, if complicated, family dynamics. One day, I sat down with my mom, the woman who stood by me through every high and every low. We were in her cozy kitchen, the smell of fresh coffee in the air. Mom, I don't know how to ever thank you enough. You've been my rock, I started, my voice thick with emotion. Honey, you don't need to thank me. I did what any mother would do. Plus, seeing you handle everything with such grace, that's all the thanks I need, she said, her eyes misty as she sipped her coffee. As I got deeper into the process of creating my album, each song felt like a piece of my journey, a melody of my trials and triumphs. David was my constant supporter, and having Michael around brought a new dimension to our lives. It was strange how life worked out, but I was grateful for where we all ended up. I'm Eleanor, and I've been a doctor nearly as long as I've been Richard's wife. We had our ups and downs, but those 30 years flew by like they were nothing. Our house, big and cozy, was always filled with the sounds of life, especially when the boys were young. James and Oliver, our sons, were as different as night and day, yet they both brought their own kind of joy into our lives. Richard and I, both doctors, worked hard to build a comfortable life. We managed to buy a couple of apartments over the years, renting them out for some extra income. Life seemed set on a good path, until the day Richard came home looking pale and more serious than I'd seen in years. "Eleanor, we need to talk," he said, his voice grave as he dropped his medical bag by the door. "Had some tests done last week. The results, they came back. It's cancer, Eleanor." The months that followed were a blur of hospital visits, treatments, and endless waiting rooms. Richard fought hard, but the cancer was merciless. Watching the strongest man I knew wither away was torture. No amount of medical training prepares you for that. One evening, as we sat quietly in the living room, Richard took my hand. "Eleanor, if things don't go our way, you need to make sure everything's sorted with the boys. The will's all done. You'll be fine financially." Not long after, he was gone. The funeral was a somber affair. Family, friends, and colleagues, people came from all over to pay their respects. But it was the quiet at home after everyone left that hit me the hardest. Empty spaces Richard used to fill, his things just where he left them. It hurt to see, to remember. A few days post-funeral, I was in the kitchen trying to make sense of leftover food when James stormed in, his face all twisted up in worry and anger. Oliver trailed behind him, looking like he wanted to be anywhere but here. "Mom, we need to talk about Dad's will," James said, cutting straight to the chase as he always did. I sighed, setting down the cling film. "Yes, I know. Your father left everything to me. He wanted to make sure I was taken care of." James slammed his hand on the counter. "But what about me and Oliver? We're his sons. It's not right that we get nothing now." Oliver piped up, trying to smooth things over. "James, let's not jump into this so hot-headed. Mom's still grieving. We can sort this out without arguing." James shot him a glare. "Easy for you to say. You're not thinking about the future. I am." I leaned against the counter, feeling the weight of their stares. "Your father and I built this together. He trusted me to handle things. But I hear you, James. It's not my plan to cut you out." "So, what, then?" James said, crossing his arms, his voice rising a notch. "We just wait until, what? You think it's a good time to give us our share?" "James, watch your tone," I snapped, my patience fraying. "I am still your mother." Oliver stepped between us, his hands up like a referee. "Both of you, please. This isn't helping. Mom, maybe there's a middle ground here?" I nodded, rubbing my temples. "Okay, here's what we can do. The apartments your father and I invested in." "The ones downtown?" James interrupted. "Yes, those," I continued, shooting him a look that told him to zip it for a minute. "I was thinking, you each take one. They're yours to live in or rent out. And from the savings, let's say $25,000 each, to help you get started on whatever you need." James chewed on his lip, clearly doing the math in his head. "And the rest of the stuff? The house, the money? That stays with me. For now. When I'm gone, it'll come to you, as per your father's wishes," I said firmly. James looked like he wanted to argue more, but Oliver nudged him. "Let's think about this, man. It's a fair start. Mom's not leaving us in the cold." James finally nodded, tight-lipped. "Fine. But I want this in writing, Mom. No more surprises." Of course, I agreed. "We'll get everything documented properly." As they left the kitchen, I could hear Oliver hissing at James. "Give her a break, will you? She's doing her best." James muttered something under his breath I couldn't catch, and I didn't really want to. As I washed up the dishes, I wondered if Richard could see us, and what he'd think. I hoped I was doing the right thing, but only time would tell. And time, that tricky thing, wasn't always a friend. It was a sunny afternoon, a rare kind that makes everything seem alright, when James brought Isabella over to meet me for the first time. They hadn't been dating long, but James was already head over heels. You could tell by the way he was fussing over her, which wasn't like him at all. They walked in, and right off the bat, Isabella had this air about her, like she owned the place. Dressed to the nines, she breezed into my living room with barely a hello, her eyes scanning everything. "Nice place you've got here," she said, flipping her hair back as she sat down without waiting for an invitation. James was grinning like a fool beside her. I forced a smile, trying to be the good host. "Thank you, Isabella. Can I get you anything? Coffee, tea?" "Coffee sounds lovely," she replied, then turned to James. "Babe, make sure it's black, no sugar." James nodded and headed to the kitchen. That left me alone with her, sitting in my own living room, feeling like the guest. The silence was awkward until she broke it. "So, James tells me you're pretty well off," she started, eyeing the decor. "I'm used to a certain standard, you know? My parents made sure of that." "That's good to hear," I said, not sure what else to add. James came back with the coffee and handed Isabella her cup. She took a sip and made a face. It's all right. Anyway, we've been discussing our future together. Planning ahead, you know? That's wise, I said, glancing at James, hoping he'd give me some clue about where this conversation was heading. Isabella set her cup down. Yeah, and speaking of planning, we were thinking about the wedding. You know I want something special, James has probably told you. I saw this place, perfect for a rehearsal dinner, but it's a bit pricey. It's about $30,000. I choked on my coffee. $30,000? Just for the rehearsal dinner? James jumped in. Mom, it's important to Bella. We want to start things off right. I put my cup down, feeling a storm brewing inside. Look, that's a lot of money for a dinner, Isabella. We need to be reasonable. Isabella's face hardened. Reasonable? James says you have the means. I don't see why we should compromise on something that important. James was nodding along with her, but I could see the unease in his eyes. He knew he was asking too much. I'm all for celebrating, I said, trying to keep my voice even. But $30,000 is beyond excessive. I can't justify that. Isabella stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. I'm not used to compromising on my standards, Eleanor. I was clear with James that I expect a certain lifestyle. James tried to smooth things over. Mom, maybe we can find a middle ground? There's no middle ground on $30,000 for a dinner, James. That's final, I snapped, losing my patience. Isabella picked up her purse, glaring at me. Fine. If that's how it's going to be, then maybe we need to reconsider some things. They left soon after. I sat there, reeling from the encounter. The nerve of that girl, coming into my home, drinking my coffee, and telling me how to spend my money. It felt like a slap in the face, a wake-up call I wasn't ready for. I was out at the grocery store when James and Isabella decided to drop by again. By the time I got home, Oliver was awkwardly entertaining them in the living room. The atmosphere was tense, the kind that makes you want to turn around and leave, but it was my house, so I braced myself and walked in. Isabella, all dolled up as usual, handed me a list as soon as I set down my grocery bags. Eleanor, we thought a lot about the wedding gifts, and here's what we've settled on. I hope this will be easier for you to handle. I skimmed the list she first handed me. It was surprisingly sensible: kitchen appliances, some nice china, even a couple of pieces of furniture. This seems quite reasonable, I said, feeling a momentary relief. I think these are wonderful choices. Really? James looked at Isabella, a hopeful expression crossing his face. But just as I was about to discuss where we could buy these items, Isabella's expression changed abruptly. She gasped, "Oh no, this isn't right. Give that back." She snatched the list from my hands and rummaged through her purse, pulling out another sheet of paper. Here's the actual list. This new list was nothing like the first. It included an apartment, a luxury car, an exclusive vacation, and even diamond jewelry. My jaw dropped. Is this some kind of joke? Isabella didn't flinch. No joke, Eleanor. These are the gifts we expect. Only the best for our wedding. I stared at her, then at James, waiting for him to say something, anything to suggest he didn't agree with this madness. But he just stood there, looking between us, clearly conflicted but silent. I couldn't hold back. James, why are you letting her do this? You know this is unreasonable. Isabella cut in, her voice rising. This doesn't concern you, Eleanor. You just need to pay up and keep quiet. That's when Oliver stood up, his face set hard. That's enough, Isabella. You're not going to talk to our mom like that. This is her house, and you're way out of line. You need to leave. Now. The room was thick with tension as James and Isabella gathered their things. Isabella was muttering under her breath, clearly angry. This is ridiculous. We'll remember this. They left, and the door slammed shut behind them. Sitting down, I felt the weight of the whole situation pressing down on me. Oliver sat beside me, putting an arm around my shoulders. We'll figure this out, Mom. But you can't let them bully you into giving more than you can, or should. It's not right. He was right, of course. But as I sat there with my son, I couldn't help but worry about James. How had things gotten so out of hand? How could he not see what this was doing to our family? The silence that followed was filled with unsaid worries and fears for the future. I knew then that this was far from over. It was only going to get tougher from here. The weeks that followed were a constant barrage of phone calls from James. Each one was more demanding than the last, his tone desperate, almost frantic at times. Mom, you don't understand. I can't look poor next to Bella's family. He'd argue, his voice cracking with stress. You have the money. Why can't you just help me out here? I sat at the kitchen table, phone pressed against my ear, feeling a knot in my stomach. James, it's not about the money. It's about living within your means. Bella's expectations, you can't sustain that, not without going into serious debt. He'd scoff, his frustration boiling over. What do you know about it? I'm not going to live like a beggar. I need more from the inheritance, now. The demand stung. James, I've offered to cover half the wedding costs up to $15,000 and give a $5,000 gift. That's more than generous. Everything has to be agreed upon with me, though. No surprises. There was a pause, then a sharp laugh from him. That's nothing. You're just being stingy. You have $1 million sitting there. Why are you holding out on me? Because it's not just about the money, I replied, my patience wearing thin. It's about not feeding into this fantasy that's going to ruin you. He yelled now, loud enough that I had to pull the phone away from my ear. I don't need this. I'll handle it my way. Forget you. And then, just like that, the call stopped. Months passed in silence. I tried to busy myself with daily routines, trying not to worry about James, but the peace was short-lived. The phone rang one afternoon, and it was my sister-in-law, Anita. Eleanor, I thought you should know. Anita's voice was hesitant, careful. James is flying all the wedding guests to Hawaii. He sold his apartment to fund it. And, he expects you to get there on your own. He mentioned you weren't interested in helping, so. I hung up, a mix of anger and sorrow churning inside me. How could he be so reckless? Before I could process it all, Oliver came into the room, his expression grim. Mom, there's something you need to hear. I recorded their conversation when they were sitting here in the living room. He handed me an audio recorder. I pressed play, and the voices of James and Isabella filled the kitchen. James, your mom is just a nasty old woman with a fat wallet. We need to squeeze as much as we can out of her and then cut her off. James's voice responded, chillingly agreeable. Whatever it takes, Bella. I'm not going to let her control us. If it comes down to it, I'll kick her out in her underwear. I turned off the recorder, my hands trembling. To hear my own son speak like that about me, his mother, it was too much. The room spun as I tried to comprehend the depth of his betrayal. Flying to Hawaii was a decision I didn't make lightly. Oliver was by my side, both of us tense but determined to face whatever awaited us. When we landed and approached the venue, I was taken aback by the sheer opulence of it all. Flowers everywhere, lights strung like stars across the evening sky, and music floating in the air. As we walked into the gathering, I spotted James and Isabella mingling with guests. They looked like a picture-perfect couple, all smiles and laughter. My heart ached to see my son so lost in this fabricated paradise. Before I could take another step towards them, Isabella spotted us. Her smile vanished, replaced by a scowl as she marched over, her high heels clicking angrily against the stone pathway. "You shouldn't be here," she hissed, stopping just inches from me, her voice loud enough to draw attention. "This is my day, and you're not welcome." I was stunned, but before I could respond, her parents, who had overheard, came over. Her father, a tall, stern-looking man, spoke first. "Isabella, that is no way to speak to your guest, much less to James' mother." His tone was harsh, a reprimand that made her cheeks flush with embarrassment. Her mother, looking equally appalled, turned to me with an apologetic smile. "Eleanor, please, come with us. Let's find you a place to sit." They guided us away, leading us to a table at the edge of the setup, clearly an afterthought with no proper setting. The ceremony started soon after, with speeches that felt hollow given the tension. Then, unexpectedly, I was handed the microphone. I stood, my legs shaky, but my resolve firm. "I came here today to wish my son and his new wife a happy future," I began, my voice steady despite the trembling inside. "But I also believe in honesty and integrity, something that's been sorely missing from the events leading up to this day." Isabella's face went from pink to red, her eyes glaring daggers at me. I was asked for money, time and again, in amounts that no reasonable person would find justifiable. When I couldn't meet these demands, I was threatened with separation from my family and future grandchildren. My voice cracked a bit, but I pressed on. Oliver, seeing my distress, stepped closer, placing a supportive hand on my shoulder. I nodded at him, then turned on the audio recording he had made. Isabella's voice filled the air, cold and calculating, discussing how they would milk more money from me. James' voice agreed, saying he was prepared to leave me with nothing for the sake of his bride. The crowd murmured, the air thick with shock and disapproval. I turned off the recorder, the silence heavy. I gave my son an apartment and $25,000, and yet, it was never enough. Today, I'm making it clear, I will not be treated as an ATM or threatened. I am disowning James and Isabella. I wish them well, but from this day forward, I am choosing to remove myself from their lives. The reaction was immediate. Isabella screamed, her voice shrill and wild. "You've ruined my wedding. I curse you." After everything that had happened, coming back home was bittersweet. In the quiet, I made a decision that startled even me. I quit my job. I'd spent years healing others as a doctor, but now, it was time to heal myself and rebuild the life that the recent storms had scattered. Oliver, bless his heart, had just graduated from art college and was brimming with ideas and ambition. With the $25,000 I had given him, he opened his own tattoo parlor. It wasn't just any shop, it quickly became a place where art and skin met in stunning displays. Oliver poured his soul into his work, and it paid off. He started entering tattoo contests, and soon enough, his name was on every local's lips. Before we knew it, he was opening more locations, creating a network of salons that became a hotspot for tattoo enthusiasts. I'd watch him sketch late into the night, his dedication a stark contrast to the chaos his brother had chosen. "You're doing amazing, Ollie," I'd say, pride swelling in my chest. It was during these calm months that James reappeared. One afternoon, he showed up at the door, his eyes tired, his shoulders slumped, so different from the ambitious, sharp man he once was. "Mom, I need to talk," he said, not waiting for an invitation to sit. His voice was weary, a far cry from the demanding tone I'd grown accustomed to. I sighed, motioning for him to continue. What is it, James? It's Bella, she's driving me insane. Wants more and more, nothing's ever enough. I got a second job, but it's still not enough for her. His words were desperate, but they couldn't erase the past so easily. James, I warned you. I told you, living like that, with someone like her, it's unsustainable. He rubbed his face, frustration clear. I know you did, but I thought. His voice trailed off, hopelessness taking the place of explanation. Thought what? That money would just appear because you wanted it to? My tone was harsh, but years of pent-up frustration made it hard to soften it. Look at your brother. He started with the same amount and made something of himself without stepping on others. James bristled. Yeah, well, not everyone's like Oliver, are they? I have rights to the inheritance too, remember? And when you're gone, it'll come to me. That was the last straw. Get out, James, I said, my voice cold, resolute. And don't come back. Not this time. You chose your path. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought he might argue more. But then he turned and walked out, the door slamming shut behind him. As I stood in the silence that followed, Oliver came downstairs, having heard the last part of our exchange. Are you okay, Mom? I nodded, wrapping my arms around him. I am now. Thanks to you. Let's just focus on the good we can do, on the life we can build. He hugged me back, his presence a comforting assurance that not all was lost. In that moment, I knew that despite the heartaches, the journey was still worth it. We had each other, and that was enough to keep moving forward. After the storm had passed with James, our home settled into a calm I hadn't felt in years. It was during this quiet period that Oliver brought someone special home. Her name was Sarah, and she was everything Isabella wasn't: kind, humble, and genuinely caring. As the weeks turned into months, their relationship grew stronger, and soon they announced their engagement. The wedding, unlike the extravagant affair that was James, was a simple, heartfelt ceremony in our backyard. Flowers from the garden, homemade decorations, and a small group of close friends and family made the day perfect. During the reception, I pulled Oliver aside. You've chosen a wonderful woman, I said, my voice thick with emotion. He squeezed my hand. I learned from the best, he replied, giving me a knowing look. Life moved quickly after that. They sold the apartment I had given Oliver, adding a bit of their savings to buy a small, cozy house just a few miles away. One sunny afternoon, while we were having tea in their new living room, Sarah shared some news. Eleanor, we're expecting twins, she announced, her eyes shining with excitement. I nearly dropped my cup, overwhelmed with joy. Twins? Oh, my goodness, that's wonderful. Oliver beamed, his pride evident. We wanted you to be the first to know. We're really happy, Mom. Twins, I repeated, letting the words sink in. Grandchildren. It was a new chapter, one I was eager to start. As for James, news from him was sparse. The last I heard, he had divorced Isabella. She had taken nearly everything in the split, leaving him to start over in another city. Despite the pain he had caused, it hurt to know he was out there somewhere, struggling because of his choices. One evening, as I sat looking through old photo albums, Oliver came and sat beside me. He noticed a picture of James and me from years ago. Do you ever hear from him? He asked softly. I shook my head. No. After everything, he's chosen his path, and I have to respect that, even if it breaks my heart. Oliver put an arm around me. He's still my brother, Mom. Maybe one day, he'll come around. Maybe, I agreed, not really sure if I believed it. But for now, we have plenty to keep us busy, especially with those twins on the way. Oliver chuckled. Yeah, you're about to be the busiest grandma in town. We both laughed, the sound filling the room with warmth. Despite the past, despite the mistakes and heartaches, this moment, here with Oliver, felt like everything was exactly as it should be. Life was moving on, and so were we, with new hopes and dreams just on the horizon. I remember the day I met him like it was yesterday. College was buzzing with the start of a new semester, and there I was, an eager young thing with a sketchbook under my arm, dreaming of becoming a top-notch designer. Then there was him, Jake, all charm and big dreams, talking loudly about changing the world one election at a time. We clicked instantly, two ambitious souls, not a care in the world except our future. "Hey, you're in my intro to design class, right?" he had asked me, his grin wide as he caught up to me on the campus walkway. "Yeah, that's me," trying to make sense of it all, I shot back, a playful edge to my voice. "Jake, and I get it. But hey, if you ever need a study buddy or someone to run ideas by, I'm your guy." His confidence was something else, almost enough to make you forget he was just a student like me. From then on, it was us against the world. Nights spent over coffee and textbooks, him rambling about political theories while I doodled in the margins of my notes. We were a team, and nothing felt impossible. "I'm telling you, Anita, we're gonna make it big. You'll be designing national galleries, and I'll be right there, maybe as governor, making sure the arts get the funding they deserve," he'd declare on those long nights, his eyes shining with a mixture of ambition and naivety. "And what about kids? White picket fence?" I'd tease, watching his face. He'd wave a dismissive hand. "Nah, not for us. We've got bigger plans. Who needs a fence when you can have the whole city?" It was all very romantic, in a youthful, dream big kind of way. We married before graduation, a small ceremony with just a few friends and family. It felt right, like we were setting off on an adventure together, not just tying the knot. As newlyweds, we were unstoppable. Jake quickly moved up from an assistant to the governor's aide to the head of the Department of Parks and Recreation. It seemed every month brought a new accolade or a step up the career ladder for him. He was a natural, shaking hands and kissing babies, always in the spotlight. At home, it was different. "How was your day?" became our routine conversation starter. "Busy as hell. Meetings back to back." "What about you, babe? How's the design world treating you?" I'd shrug, keeping it light. "Oh, you know, just another day of picking colors and convincing clients I know best." He'd laugh, but his eyes were often distant, mine still at work. I didn't mind, I understood. We were both hustling, after all. One evening, I came home, my mind buzzing from clinching a major deal that would put our department at the forefront of the industry. I was tired, my shoulders aching from the weight of my laptop bag and the day's stresses. Jake was already home, something that had become rarer these days. I clinched the Johnson account. The presentation went off without a hitch, I announced, hoping to share a piece of my day, looking for a flicker of shared excitement. "That's nice, babe," Jake said, not looking up from his papers scattered around the living room. "Listen, since you had a lighter day, could you fix dinner? I'm swamped. Meetings back to back, and I barely had lunch." I paused at the doorway, my coat half off, the words "lighter day" echoing in my head. Lighter day, Jake? It was an 8-hour showdown to secure a deal that boosts our entire fiscal year. He finally looked up, his eyes meeting mine with a shrug. "Yeah, but it's not like you're out there in the trenches, right? It's all just picking colors and convincing people to like your ideas." The dismissive tone stung more than I expected. "It's a bit more than that, Jake. This was a big win for us." Sure, he muttered, turning back to his papers. "But really, can you handle dinner? I'm beat." The conversation left a bitter taste in my mouth as I headed to the kitchen, my triumph overshadowed by his offhand remarks. Weeks passed, and the pattern continued. I was making strides at work, each step up the ladder marked by an increase in responsibility and income. The day I found out my salary had surpassed Jake's was a day of mixed feelings. I wanted to share it with him, but I hesitated, knowing his current state of mind. Finally, one night at dinner, I broached the topic, trying to keep it light. "You know, with the new accounts I brought in, it looks like I might be out earning you this year." Funny, huh? Jake put down his fork, his expression unreadable. Really? That's how you're going to bring it up? I frowned, puzzled by his tone. Bring what up, Jake? It's good news. It means we're doing well, both of us. It's not we, Anita. It's you. And now I need to find a way to step up. I can't have people thinking I can't provide. I reached across the table, trying to bridge the gap his words had created. Jake, it's not a competition. It's our money, for our future. He pulled his hand back, shaking his head. It's not that simple. You don't get it. This is important to me. His words felt like a slap, dismissing not just my efforts, but our partnership. I thought we were in this together, Jake. When did it become just about you? Since I started being the one left behind, he shot back, his voice rising. You're there with your fancy deals and now out-earning me? What does that make me? It makes you my husband, I said, my voice soft but firm. Not my competitor. Jake scoffed, standing up abruptly. I need to think about this. Maybe look into other options, something that pays better. I watched him go, feeling the chasm widen. It wasn't just about money or success. It was about respect, understanding, and support, things that were becoming rarer in our conversations. That night, I lay in bed, turning over the day's conversation. It felt like we were worlds apart, living under the same roof, but walking different paths. I knew something had to give, but at that moment, I wasn't sure what or how. What I did know was that I couldn't let his insecurities dictate my success or our happiness. But fixing that was a puzzle I hadn't figured out yet. 15 years into our marriage, our life was a testament to outward success, a beautiful house, shiny cars, properties here and there, and bank accounts that would make anyone envious. But not everything that glitters is gold, and for Jake, it seemed the sheen was definitely starting to tarnish. He had been with the Natural Resources Agency for a good while, but his career was like a car stuck in mud, spinning its wheels but going nowhere. I'd listened to him rant after another long, liquor-tinged evening. It's all rigged, Anita. The jobs I deserve are going to guys who can't tell a policy from a pancake. It's all about who you know, or who you, well, you know. He'd grumble, tipping back another drink. I tried to offer solutions, not just a sympathetic ear. Have you thought about seeing someone? A therapist could help, I suggested one night as I cleared the dinner dishes, his glass needing a refill. Jake slammed his fist down on the table, making the cutlery jump. I don't need a shrink, Anita. The problem isn't in my head. It's in the corruption and cronyism I have to deal with every day. But maybe talking to someone could help you cope better, or even strategize how to get around those obstacles. I persisted, feeling the weight of his frustration as my own. Just drop it, will you? I know my job. What I need is for the system to change, not my mindset. His anger was a wall I couldn't penetrate, no matter how I tried. So, I focused on what I could control, my own career. I was making waves, leading my team in international exhibitions, my designs becoming the face of major contracts. My opinion mattered at work, I was respected, and it felt damn good. But as I flourished, Jake recoiled even more. He stopped accompanying me to any work events, especially the big, glitzy ones where my achievements were front and center. Why don't you come to the gala tomorrow night? I asked him one evening, trying to keep my tone light. It would mean a lot to me. Plus, the CEO will be there, you could make some connections. Jake looked up from his laptop, his face set in a stubborn line. And what? Stand around while everyone congratulates you? I'm pretty sure they just see me as Mr. Anita these days. That's not true, I countered, feeling a pang in my heart. You're my husband, Jake. You're your own person, and they respect that. He scoffed, closing his laptop with a snap. Right, Anita. To them, I'm just the guy who carries your purse. No thanks. I've got better things to do. It hurt more than I wanted to admit. I was proud of what I'd achieved, But I wanted my partner by my side, sharing in the success, not resenting it. The next day, as I put on my evening dress, looking in the mirror, I felt a mix of excitement and sadness. My reflection showed a woman who had everything she'd ever wanted professionally, but personally, there was a gaping hole where her husband's support should be. I went alone, as I had started to do more often. The gala was a blur of congratulations, handshakes, and bright smiles. I accepted the accolades and spoke about my latest designs, but each time I saw a couple together, laughing or sharing a quiet moment, my heart ached. Returning home, I found Jake on the couch, a bottle in hand, not even pretending to have waited up. The clock was ticking past 9 p.m. as I rushed out of the conference room, my phone dead from the day's back-to-back meetings. My mind was racing with the discussions we'd had, but a nagging thought about Jake waiting at home made my heart race faster. We hadn't spoken since the morning, and I knew he'd be wondering where I was. I drove home as quickly as I could, rehearsing an apology in my mind. But when I walked through the front door, the cold look in Jake's eyes told me no apology would suffice tonight. "You're late," he stated flatly, his voice edged with accusation as he sat in the dimly lit living room. "I'm sorry, Jake. The meeting ran over, and my phone died. I didn't get a chance to call." I dropped my keys in the bowl by the door, my voice weary. "Meeting, huh? Or should I say your little party with the bosses?" His words were sharp, his eyes narrowing. I was taken aback. "What are you talking about? It was just a regular business meeting, Jake." "Sure it was. I bet it's all those late nights with them that got you where you are. Not your talent, just playing up to the bosses." His voice was bitter, and he took a swig from the bottle next to him. My cheeks flushed with anger and disbelief. "You think I got my promotions by, what? Sleeping around? How can you even say that?" He laughed, a harsh sound that filled the room. "Oh, come on, Anita. It's obvious. Why else would they promote you, a woman, over others?" The accusation stung, and I felt a mix of hurt and fury. I earned my position with hard work and talent. It's disgusting that you'd think so low of me. Jake stood up abruptly, his body swaying slightly. "You're never here. Always working, leaving me alone. And we don't even have kids, because you're too busy with your career." His words were like slaps, each one hitting hard. "I can't believe you're blaming me for no kids. We agreed on this, Jake. And my career is not an excuse for your unhappiness or failures." He stepped closer, his voice rising. "My failures? No, Anita, they're because I married someone who cares more about her job than her husband. You've ruined everything." I tried to keep my voice calm. "Jake, this isn't us. We're both upset. Maybe we should talk about this in the morning when you're sober." "No, I'm done. I need to be alone." He grabbed his keys and headed toward the door. "Jake, wait." But he was already gone, the door slamming behind him. I tried calling him several times, but it went straight to voicemail. Alone in the house, I wandered from room to room, each one echoing with the ghost of earlier, happier times. I couldn't sleep, the couch cold and unwelcoming, his accusations replaying in my mind. The morning after Jake stormed out, I dragged myself to work. My eyes were red from a sleepless night, my mind swirling with the harsh words and the slam of the door echoing in my ears. I was on autopilot, nodding and smiling where needed, but inside, I felt like I was crumbling. Mid-morning, my boss called me into his office. I straightened my blazer and tried to compose myself, wiping away the last traces of tears. "Anita, I've got something that might interest you," he said, his tone more upbeat than I could handle at that moment. "How would you like to head our new project in Milan? It's a big opportunity, international exposure, leading a team. I thought of you immediately." Milan. Italy had always been a dream, one of those places I'd promised myself I'd visit, one way or another. Under different circumstances, I would have jumped at the chance, no second thoughts. "That sounds incredible, sir," I managed, a genuine smile breaking through the fog of my sadness. "It's actually a dream of mine to work in Milan." "Great. I knew you'd be excited. Think it over, and let me know your decision. Returning home, I found Jake sitting at the kitchen table, looking sober but somber. The air between us was thick with unsaid words. I hesitated at the doorway, then decided to breach the silence. Jake, we need to talk. I was offered a major project today. It's in Milan, I began, watching his reaction closely. He looked up, his face hardening. Milan, huh? And what, you're just going to go? It's a big deal for my career, Jake. It could change everything for us, for me. I want to take it. I tried to keep my voice steady, assertive. Us? There's no us in this, Anita. It's always about you and your career. His voice rose, a bitter edge slicing through the quiet of the kitchen. I'm still the same person, Jake. I'm still your wife. Why can't you see this as something good for both of us? I pleaded, hoping for some sliver of understanding. There is no both of us if you choose to go to Milan. It's me or the job, Anita. Decide. His ultimatum hung in the air, stark and cold. Why do you make me choose, Jake? Why can't you be happy for me? My voice cracked, frustration and pain bubbling up. Because I need to know where I stand. Either you're with me, or you're there, living your dream without me. He was yelling now, his face red with anger. I took a deep breath, my mind made up, heart aching. I choose Milan. I have to do this, Jake, not just for my career, but for myself. Jake stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the tile floor. He stormed to our bedroom and came back with a stack of papers, divorce papers. Slamming them down on the table, he met my eyes with a cold finality. Then this is it, Anita. If you go, we're done. I stared at the papers, then at him, my heart sinking. But something inside me hardened. I couldn't give up on my dreams, not even for him. The next week was a blur. I signed the papers, packed my bags, and before I knew it, I was on a plane to Milan. The city was beautiful, a picturesque postcard at every turn. I was often on TV, discussing the project, my face a mask of professionalism, hiding the turmoil inside. Despite the excitement, my thoughts drifted back to Jake, to the possibility of fixing things. But each time I picked up my phone to call, I remembered his ultimatum, and my resolve strengthened. Stepping back into the house after 2 weeks in Milan felt surreal. But there he was, Jake, sitting on the sofa as if the past month had been just a minor hiccup. Anita, you're back. Come here, he said, rising from the couch with open arms, a forced smile plastered across his face. I approached, but kept my distance, the memories of his ultimatums and threats too fresh to allow any closer. Jake, we can't just pretend nothing happened. You gave me an ultimatum, remember? Me or the job? He waved a dismissive hand, his voice light. Oh, that. I was just stressed, you know? But I've had time to think, and I'm willing to start over. I'm ready to forgive you, as long as you agree to make some changes. My eyebrows shot up. Forgive me? For what, exactly? For following my career? And what changes are you talking about? Jake's expression hardened slightly. You know, Anita, quit your job, focus on us. If you'd just listen and do as I say, we could go back to how things were. It hit me then, the sheer absurdity and manipulation in his words. I felt a mix of anger and relief, anger at his audacity, and relief that I was finally seeing the manipulation for what it was. You can't be serious, Jake. You're asking me to give up everything I've worked for. You know I can't do that. He laughed, a tight, cold sound. It was worth a shot. But I thought you'd see sense. Guess I was wrong. I reached into my bag, pulling out the divorce papers, the ones he had thrown at me before I left. I signed these, Jake. I thought you were serious about the divorce. Seems I was right. His smile faltered, and he snatched the papers from my hand. This was just a joke, Anita. Can't you take a joke? A joke? I stared at him, incredulous. Threatening divorce was a joke? You're unbelievable. Jake's face turned red, his voice rising. "You're making a huge mistake, Anita. You'll regret this. I won't let you just walk away and ruin everything." "I'm not ruining anything. I'm saving myself," I said firmly. "You've made it clear where I stand with you. It's time for me to move on." He stood, towering over me, his voice venomous. "Fine. But you're not taking anything from here. This is my house, my things. You leave with nothing. I'll make sure everyone knows how you got to the top. I'll destroy you. Try it, and it'll backfire," I said calmly, though my heart was pounding. "I've done nothing wrong. My conscience is clear." I went to our bedroom, packed a suitcase with essentials, some clothes, my design portfolios, personal documents. The rest didn't matter. I could replace things, but I couldn't replace peace of mind or self-respect. The morning after leaving the house, I made my way to my lawyer's office, my mind a whirlwind of emotions and plans. Walking into Mr. Carter's office, I found him looking over some papers, his glasses perched on the tip of his nose. He looked up, his expression serious. "Anita, good to see you. Please, have a seat. Tell me everything." I took a deep breath and started recounting the recent events, not omitting the harsh words and threats Jake had hurled at me. And then he told me he'd make sure I wouldn't get a penny and would ruin my reputation, I concluded, my voice steadier than I felt. Mr. Carter's brow furrowed as he listened, jotting down notes. "We need to take this seriously, Anita. Have you considered hiring a private investigator? We might find something that could help us in court." A bitter laugh escaped my lips, surprising even me. "I'm ahead of you there, Mr. Carter. I hired one a few months ago when things started to really go downhill. I didn't trust what was happening behind my back." Reaching into my bag, I pulled out a folder, thick with documents and photos, and handed it to him. "Everything's in here." Turns out, Jake has been more than just verbally abusive. Mr. Carter opened the folder and began to examine the contents meticulously. His expression changed from concerned to outright shocked as he sifted through the photographs and reports. Anita, this is solid evidence. He's been taking bribes for approving certain city projects. And this," he pointed at a photo, "shows him with his assistant at a not-so-professional event." "Yes, and she's been more than just an assistant for quite a while," I added, feeling a mix of vindication and sorrow. Mr. Carter leaned back, pressing his fingers together, looking at me over his glasses. "This changes everything. We not only have a strong case for the divorce on grounds of infidelity, but possibly more. His threats against you and this evidence could sway things significantly in your favor." The days leading up to the trial were tense. Jake's calls became more frequent and desperate. He alternated between begging me to come back and cursing my name. Each voicemail, each missed call, I saved and documented. The proceedings began, and Mr. Carter was relentless. "Your Honor, we have substantial evidence here not only of Mr. Thompson's infidelity, which has devastated my client, but also of his illegal activities related to his position at the Natural Resources Agency." Jake's face went pale as Mr. Carter laid out photo after photo, document after document, all while recounting the threats he'd made against me. When it was finally Jake's turn, he tried to dismiss the claims. "These are all baseless accusations. She's trying to ruin my career because she's jealous." The judge looked over the rim of her glasses, unimpressed. "We have substantial evidence before us, Mr. Thompson. Can you explain these transactions and these photographs?" His voice faltered, his usual charm failing him under the weight of undeniable proof. I was just doing my job. Those photos are out of context." But it was too late. The evidence was overwhelming. After a brief deliberation, the judge spoke, her voice firm and clear. "Given the evidence presented, I am awarding Mrs. Thompson financial compensation for the distress caused by the infidelity and threats. The division of property will be equal." With the past finally behind me, I threw myself into my work with a passion that hadn't felt this raw and real in years. Before I knew it, my dedication paid off. I was offered the position of creative director. It was a dream come true, a position I had eyed for years. I was out celebrating this new chapter at a cozy little bistro downtown with my closest friend, Laura, when my phone buzzed. The screen showed Jake's name, a sight that no longer caused my heart to skip in dread. "Ugh, it's Jake," I muttered, showing Laura the phone. "Are you going to answer it?" she asked, her eyebrow raised in that all too familiar, "Are you serious?" look. Curiosity got the better of me, and I answered. "What do you want, Jake?" "Hey, Anita. I've been thinking. I realized I made a huge mistake. Can we meet? I'd like to talk about maybe starting over." Jake's voice came through the speaker, a mix of desperation and something that sounded feebly like sincerity. I couldn't help it, I burst into laughter. It wasn't a joyful sound, more of a "can you believe this guy" kind of laugh. "Start over? Really, Jake? After everything?" "It's all changed, Anita. I got fired. She took everything, even the job. And now, she won't give back the gifts either. I'm left with nothing." He blurted out, the words tumbling over each other in his haste. I shook my head, still chuckling. "So, let me get this straight. You want to start over because she dumped you and took your job? That's rich, Jake. You don't understand. I've changed, Anita. I really have," he pleaded. "Jake, even if that's true, I've moved on. I'm a creative director now, and my life is full and happy without you. There's no place for you in it anymore," I said, the finality in my voice mirroring the resolve in my heart. "But Anita, I wish you the best, Jake. Goodbye." I ended the call, blocked his number, and turned off my phone. Laura was looking at me, a proud smile spreading across her face. "You really are over him, aren't you?" she said, lifting her wine glass in a toast. "Completely," I confirmed, clinking her glass with mine. "To new beginnings, and to being in charge of my own happiness." The next day, feeling empowered and in need of companionship that asked for nothing but love in return, I decided it was time to expand my little family. I went to the local shelter, where a scruffy terrier mix caught my eye. He was a little older, a bit rough around the edges, much like me. It felt right, adopting him. I named him Buddy, a friend who I knew would offer loyalty without conditions. Life was good. It was real, it was mine, and it was filled with possibilities. I had made it through the storm, and now, I was not just surviving, I was thriving. My name is Sarah, and I've always believed that family is the most precious thing in life. I'm married to my loving husband, Jack, and we have 2 wonderful adult children, our son, Michael, and our daughter, Emily. Michael followed in his father's footsteps and became an engineer, while Emily pursued her passion for art. I couldn't have been prouder of both of them. Emily's artistic career took off quickly after college. She organized exhibitions that drew quite a crowd, and I never missed a single one. I remember her first major show like it was yesterday. The gallery was packed, and Emily's paintings were the talk of the evening. As I walked around the gallery admiring Emily's work, I spotted her talking animatedly with a tall, handsome man. Little did I know then that this man, David, would become her husband and the father of my granddaughter. Their whirlwind romance was a joy to watch. David seemed to adore Emily, and she was happier than I'd ever seen her. They married in a beautiful ceremony just a year after they met, and soon after, Emily announced she was pregnant. I was over the moon at the prospect of becoming a grandmother. When little Sophia was born, I fell in love all over again. She had Emily's dark curls and David's green eyes, a perfect combination of both her parents. It was around this time that Emily made a decision that surprised me. She announced that she was quitting her job to work from home and raise Sophia full-time. "Are you sure about this, honey?" I asked her one afternoon as we sat in her living room, watching Sophia play with her blocks. "Your career was just taking off. I'd be more than happy to help with Sophia if you want to keep working." Emily shook her head, a determined look in her eyes. "I appreciate the offer, Mom, but I want to do this myself. I'm ready to sacrifice my career for Sophia. She needs me right now. I couldn't quite shake the feeling that something was off about this decision, but I respected Emily's choice. After all, she was a grown woman capable of making her own decisions. As the months passed, I noticed that Emily became more distant. Our regular coffee dates became less frequent, and when I called, she always seemed to be busy. As Emily drifted away, I found myself spending more time with Michael and his wife, Lisa. When they had their son, Tommy, Lisa asked if I could help out as a nanny. Of course, I jumped at the chance. And so, I threw myself into my role as Tommy's nanny. It was exhausting but rewarding work, and it helped fill the void left by Emily's absence. Still, I couldn't help but wonder if Emily was upset about the time I was spending with Tommy. I wanted to talk to her about it, but she kept avoiding my calls and canceling our plans. As Christmas approached, I held on to hope that Emily would reach out. I imagined us all gathered around the tree, Sophia opening presents with wide-eyed wonder. But as the days ticked by, that hope began to fade. On Christmas Eve, I sent Emily a message. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart. We miss you and would love to see you tomorrow. Love, Mom." Hours passed, with no response. I tried to focus on the joy of having Michael, Lisa, and Tommy over, but Emily's absence cast a shadow over the festivities. Christmas morning came and still no word from Emily. As we sat around opening presents, I couldn't help but notice the empty spot where Emily, David, and Sophia should have been. "Mom, are you okay?" Michael asked, noticing my distraction. I forced a smile. "Of course, dear. Just thinking about how fast you've all grown up." But inside, I was seething. This wasn't just about missing a family gathering anymore. This was about crossing a line. After the presents were opened and the dinner was cleared away, I turned to Jack. "We need to go see Emily," I said firmly. "This has gone on long enough." Jack knew better than to argue when I used that tone. He nodded, and we began gathering gifts for Emily, David, and Sophia. As we pulled up to their house, I noticed that the curtains were drawn, and the Christmas lights that Emily usually put up were noticeably absent. My heart sank a little more. We approached the front door, arms laden with gifts. Jack rang the doorbell, and we waited. Seconds stretched into what felt like hours before we heard movement inside. The door creaked open, and there stood Emily. My heart nearly stopped at the sight of her. She looked different. Tired, yes, but there was something more. Her eyes, usually bright and full of life, seemed dull and weary. She was wearing long sleeves, despite the warmth of the house, and she held herself as if she was in pain. "Mom? Dad? What are you doing here?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We missed you at the family gathering, so we thought we'd bring Christmas to you." Emily's eyes darted nervously behind her before she stepped onto the porch, partially closing the door behind her. That's really nice of you, but you shouldn't have come. I'm not feeling well, and I didn't want to get anyone sick." It was then that I noticed the bruise on her arm, partially hidden by her sleeve. My motherly instincts went into overdrive. "Emily, what happened to your arm?" I asked, reaching out to her. She flinched away from my touch, pulling her sleeve down. "Oh, it's nothing. I had a little accident the other day. Slipped in the bathroom. Clumsy me." I exchanged a glance with Jack. We both knew she was lying. "Where's Sophia?" Jack asked, trying to peek inside the house. "We brought her some presents." Emily's face softened at the mention of her daughter. "She's napping right now. But I'm sure she'd love to see you. Maybe she could come visit you tomorrow?" I nodded eagerly, grasping at this olive branch. "Of course. We'd love to have her over." We chatted for a few more minutes, the conversation stilted and uncomfortable. Emily kept glancing back at the house, as if afraid someone would overhear. As we were about to leave, I couldn't help but pull Emily into a hug. She stiffened at first, but then melted into my embrace. For a moment, I felt like I was holding my little girl again. The next day, I woke up early, my mind still reeling from our visit to Emily's house. I busied myself in the kitchen, preparing Sophia's favorite foods and setting up some art supplies. Around noon, the doorbell rang. I rushed to answer it, finding Emily standing there with Sophia. My heart ached at the sight of my daughter, her eyes darting nervously as if expecting trouble. "Hi, Mom," she said softly. "Sophia's excited to spend some time with you." I knelt down to Sophia's level, opening my arms. "Hello, sweetheart. Grandma's so happy to see you." Sophia hesitated for a moment before running into my embrace. I held her tightly, breathing in her sweet, familiar scent. Emily handed me Sophia's backpack. "I've packed some of her things. I'll be back to pick her up this evening, okay?" I turned my attention to my granddaughter, determined to make the most of our time together. "Come on, sweetie. Let's go see what fun things Grandma has planned." We spent the afternoon drawing, baking cookies, and playing with dolls. It was wonderful to see Sophia laugh and play, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She seemed more subdued than usual, often glancing at the door as if expecting someone to burst in. As we sat coloring together, I decided to gently probe. "Sophia, honey, is everything okay at home?" Sophia's crayon paused mid-stroke. She looked up at me with those big, innocent eyes. "Mommy cries a lot," she said quietly. My heart clenched. "Why does Mommy cry, sweetheart?" Sophia shrugged, returning to her coloring. "Daddy yells at her. He says mean things." I tried to keep my voice calm, even as anger and fear surged through me. "What kind of mean things, Sophia?" "He says Mommy is stupid and can't do anything right. Sometimes he grabs her arms really hard." Sophia demonstrated, gripping her own arm tightly. We sat like that for a while, my mind racing. I knew I had to do something, but I wasn't sure what. I couldn't let Emily and Sophia continue living in fear. As the afternoon wore on, Sophia's play took a disturbing turn. She began acting out scenes with her dolls, making them yell at each other and push each other around. "Sophia," I said gently, "where did you learn to play like that?" She looked up at me, her face serious. "That's how Daddy treats Mommy sometimes." After Sophia's revelations, I couldn't sit idle any longer. I called Lisa, my daughter-in-law, and asked if she could watch Sophia for a few hours. She agreed without hesitation, sensing the urgency in my voice. "Jack," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and determination, "we need to go to Emily's house. Now." He nodded, his face grim. "I'll drive." The ride to Emily's house was tense, filled with unspoken worries. As we pulled up to their street, I suggested we speak to the neighbors first. "Maybe they've heard something," I reasoned. "It could give us a better idea of what's really going on." We approached the house next door, and a middle-aged woman answered. Her eyes narrowed as we introduced ourselves as Emily's parents. "We're concerned about our daughter," I explained. "Have you heard any disturbances from their house? Any arguments or screaming?" The woman's face hardened. "I haven't heard a thing," she said dismissively. "They seem like a perfectly normal couple to me." Her arrogant tone set my teeth on edge, but I thanked her politely. As we walked away, Jack squeezed my hand reassuringly. We were about to knock on Emily's door when we heard it, David's voice, raised in anger. "Why did you let Sophia go to your mother's? You know, I don't like her spending time there." My blood ran cold. Jack and I exchanged a look of horror before I jabbed the doorbell, my heart pounding. The shouting abruptly stopped. Moments later, David opened the door, a pleasant smile plastered on his face. "Sarah, Jack, what a surprise. What brings you here?" he asked, his voice eerily calm. I peered past him, my eyes widening as I saw Emily struggling to her feet. Without a word, I pushed past David and rushed to my daughter's side. "Emily, sweetheart, are you all right?" I asked, checking her for visible injuries. She nodded weakly, avoiding my gaze. Anger surged through me as I turned to face David. "How dare you treat my daughter like this?" I hissed, my voice low and dangerous. "I know what's been going on here, and I won't stand for it any longer." David's facade cracked for a moment before he regained his composure. "I think you've misunderstood, Sarah. I'm simply trying to raise my wife properly. She can be quite difficult sometimes, you know." "Raise her?" I spat. "She's your wife, not your child. And there's nothing proper about abuse." David's eyes narrowed. "Why don't we ask the neighbors? They'll tell you everything's fine here." In that moment, I realized the horrifying truth: the neighbors were complicit in this abuse, turning a blind eye to Emily's suffering. "I think it's time for you to leave," David said coldly. "I need some time to cool down. We can discuss this misunderstanding later." Before I could protest, he was out the door, leaving us alone with Emily. As soon as he was gone, Emily broke down. Through her tears, she began to reveal the full extent of her ordeal. David had forced her to quit her job, isolated her from family and friends. He controlled her every move, checking her phone and taking away her car. "He told the neighbors I was a bad wife and mother," she whispered. "That he was raising me to be better." They all believed him. I became an outcast in my own neighborhood. My heart shattered as I listened to my daughter's pain. I held her tightly, vowing silently that I would do whatever it took to get her and Sophia out of this nightmare. "He's gone to get more alcohol," Emily said, fear creeping into her voice. "He'll be back soon." As we began to plan our next move, I knew we were in for a fight. But looking at my daughter's bruised but hopeful face, I knew it was a fight worth having. No matter what it took, we would free Emily from this cycle of abuse and bring her home where she belonged. I turned to Emily, my voice firm but gentle. "Sweetheart, I want you to pack your things and Sophia's. You're coming home with us." Emily's eyes widened with a mix of hope and fear. "But Mom, what about David? He'll be so angry." Jack stepped forward, his jaw set with determination. "That's his problem, not yours. I'm your father, and I'll protect you. Both of you." With trembling hands, Emily began to gather their belongings. I helped her, moving quickly and efficiently, knowing time was of the essence. Within minutes, we had packed the essentials into 2 suitcases. As we left the house, I could hear murmuring voices. A group of neighbors had gathered near the gate, their eyes following us with disapproval. An elderly woman stepped forward, her face pinched with judgment. "You should be ashamed," she spat at me. "You've raised your daughter poorly. She should be grateful that her husband tolerates her and takes care of her and the child." Anger surged through me. Without a word, I gently took Emily's arm and pushed up her sleeve, revealing the dark bruises that mottled her skin. "Is this what you call taking care?" I asked, my voice ringing out in the sudden silence. "Would any of you like to be raised like this?" The neighbors' faces flushed with embarrassment, and they quickly dispersed, avoiding eye contact. We hurried to the car, Jack helping Emily with the suitcases while I kept watch. Just as we were about to leave, I spotted a familiar figure running towards us. "David," I gasped. He was red-faced with rage as he reached the car, immediately grabbing for Emily. "What do you think you're doing?" he snarled. Before I could react, Jack was there, pushing David away from the car door. "Don't you dare touch her," he growled. "Stay away from my daughter." David's eyes darted between us, his fists clenching and unclenching at his sides. The situation was escalating quickly. "We need to call the police," I said, pulling out my phone with shaking hands. As I dialed, Jack ushered Emily into the car. We quickly locked the doors, our hearts pounding as David circled the vehicle like a predator. "You can't take her," he shouted, kicking the car in frustration. "She's my wife." I spoke calmly to the 911 operator, explaining the situation while keeping an eye on David's increasingly erratic behavior. Emily sat in the back seat, her face pale with fear. "It's okay, sweetheart," I reassured her. "The police are on their way. We're going to be fine." Minutes felt like hours as we waited, David's shouts growing more desperate. I could see neighbors peeking out of windows, witnessing the scene but doing nothing to intervene. Finally, we heard sirens in the distance. David's face contorted with panic, and for a moment, I thought he might try to run. But he stood his ground, a defiant look in his eyes as the police cars pulled up. The arrival of the police brought a momentary sense of relief. Officers quickly assessed the situation, examining Emily's visible injuries and taking statements from all parties involved. The tension in the air was palpable as David was handcuffed and placed in the back of a police car. "He'll be detained for a few days while we investigate," one of the officers informed us. "We'll need you to come to the station to provide a formal statement, Mrs. Thompson." Emily nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Okay." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Emily bravely recounted her experiences to the police, her voice growing stronger with each retelling. I stayed by her side, offering support and corroborating her story where I could. However, our hope for a quick resolution was dashed when David's lawyer presented a united front of neighbors, all claiming that Emily and David had a perfectly normal relationship. "She's always been dramatic," one neighbor testified. "David's a saint for putting up with her." Their words made my blood boil, but I reminded myself to stay calm for Emily's sake. Determined to prove Emily's innocence, we agreed to a lie detector test. I held my breath as she answered question after question, her voice steady despite the stress. When the results came back confirming her truthfulness, I felt a surge of vindication. A psychological evaluation followed, revealing the depths of Emily's trauma. "Your daughter is suffering from severe depression, likely stemming from prolonged domestic abuse," the psychologist explained to me privately. "She'll need ongoing support and therapy." Despite the mounting evidence, David remained adamant about his innocence. His latest threat to seek full custody of Sophia sent Emily into a panic. "He can't take her, Mom," she sobbed. "I can't lose my baby." That's when I knew we needed to dig deeper. I hired a private detective, hoping to uncover something in David's past that would expose his true nature. Weeks passed as the detective worked tirelessly. Emily and Sophia stayed with us, slowly beginning to heal in a safe environment. Watching my daughter rediscover her smile was both heartwarming and heartbreaking. Finally, the detective called with news. "Mrs. Thompson, I found something you need to see." The information he presented was shocking. David had a history of domestic violence in another city. He'd been ordered to undergo therapy but had fled the state before completing the program. "There's more," the detective said grimly. "I've collected testimonies from other victims. The pattern is always the same: charm, control, then violence." As I leafed through the files, a mix of emotions washed over me. Anger at David for causing so much pain, relief that we finally had concrete evidence, and sadness for all the women who had suffered before Emily. "Thank you," I said to the detective, my voice thick with emotion. This changes everything." The day of the court hearing arrived, and the tension in the air was palpable. I sat beside Emily, squeezing her hand reassuringly as we waited for the proceedings to begin. Our lawyer, a stern-faced woman named Ms. Henderson, arranged the stack of evidence before her. As the judge called the court to order, I could see David across the room, looking smug and confident. That confidence, however, began to waver as Ms. Henderson presented our case. "Your Honor," she began, "I'd like to present evidence of Mr. David Thompson's history of domestic abuse." One by one, she laid out the detective's findings, police reports from David's previous city, incomplete therapy records, and testimonies from past victims. David's lawyer objected vigorously, but the judge overruled him, allowing the evidence. Then came a moment that sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Ms. Henderson called forward a witness, Sarah, David's ex-girlfriend from 7 years ago. Sarah's voice trembled as she recounted her experiences. He would fly into rages over the smallest things. The bruises. I had to cover them with makeup every day. Next, Ms. Henderson presented Emily's lie detector results and psychological evaluation. As you can see, Your Honor, Mrs. Emily Thompson's account has been verified by multiple professional sources. The coup de grace came in the form of voice messages David had left on Emily's phone. His threatening voice filled the courtroom. "If you ever try to leave me, I'll make sure you never see Sophia again." Just when I thought we'd presented everything, Ms. Henderson surprised us all. "Your Honor, we have one more witness. With the court's permission, I'd like to call Sophia Thompson to the stand, accompanied by her child psychologist." My heart clenched as I watched my 5-year-old granddaughter walk to the front of the courtroom, her small hand clasped in the psychologist's. Sophia's eyes were wide, but her voice was clear as she spoke. "Daddy would yell at Mommy a lot," she said. "He would push her and say mean things. It scared me." Then came the moment that left the entire courtroom in stunned silence. Sophia's psychologist presented a video to the court, a shaky, dimly lit clip that Sophia had recorded on her mother's phone one night when she'd been woken by shouting. In the video, David's enraged voice could be clearly heard, along with the sound of something shattering and Emily's frightened pleas. As the video ended, I could see tears in the judge's eyes. David sat slumped in his chair, all pretense of innocence gone. The judge's verdict came swiftly and decisively. David was sentenced to prison for domestic abuse, with mandatory counseling. Emily was granted a divorce, awarded 50% of their shared property, substantial financial compensation, and full custody of Sophia. David was barred from any contact with Sophia until she turned 18, and even then, only if she chose to see him. As the gavel fell, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Emily collapsed into my arms, sobbing, not from fear this time, but from sheer relief. "It's over, Mom," she whispered. "It's finally over." As we left the courtroom, I saw David being led away in handcuffs. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and I saw something I never expected: regret. But it was too little, too late. As I stood in my kitchen, preparing a feast for our weekly family dinner, I couldn't help but smile. The house was filled with the cheerful noise of my grandchildren playing, the aroma of roasting chicken, and the gentle hum of conversation from the living room where Emily and Michael were catching up. It had been 6 months since the court hearing, and the change in our family was palpable. The dark cloud that had hung over us for so long had finally lifted, replaced by a warmth and joy that I had feared we might never experience again. Emily and Sophia had moved in with Jack and me after the trial. At first, I worried it might be challenging for all of us to adjust, but those fears quickly dissipated. Having them close allowed us to provide the support and love they needed to heal. Sophia, my brave little granddaughter, was making remarkable progress. The nightmares that had plagued her in the early days after leaving David had become less frequent. Now, more often than not, I would hear her giggling with her cousin Tommy as they played elaborate make-believe games. "Grandma, look!" Sophia called out, running into the kitchen with a drawing in her hand. "I made this for you." I wiped my hands on my apron and knelt down to examine her artwork. The page was filled with bright colors, a stark contrast to the dark, scribbled drawings she had produced in the months following the trial. This picture showed our family, stick figures with big smiles, standing in front of a yellow house, with a rainbow arching overhead. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," I said, pulling her into a hug. "Why don't we hang it on the fridge?" As I stood up, I caught sight of Emily watching us from the doorway, a soft smile on her face. The change in her was just as remarkable as Sophia's. The haunted look in her eyes had faded, replaced by a spark of life that grew brighter each day. "Need any help, Mom?" she asked, stepping into the kitchen. "You can set the table if you'd like," I replied, gesturing to the stack of plates on the counter. As we worked side by side, I marveled at how natural it felt. These simple moments of domesticity, once taken for granted, now felt like precious gifts. Emily had started drawing again, something she hadn't done since the early days of her marriage to David. Her studio, once Jack's old office, was filled with canvases. I had watched her art evolve over the past months, mirroring her healing journey. The first pieces had been dark and chaotic, all harsh lines and somber colors. But gradually, light began to creep in. Now, her latest works were explosions of color and life. "I have some exciting news," Emily said as she laid out the silverware. "The gallery downtown wants to feature some of my new pieces in their upcoming show." "Oh, sweetheart, that's wonderful," I exclaimed, pulling her into a hug. "I'm so proud of you." Emily beamed, her eyes shining with a confidence I hadn't seen in years. She had recently started working part-time at a local art supply store, slowly reintegrating into the workforce. It was a small step, but an important one in reclaiming her independence. As we all gathered around the dinner table that evening, Jack, Michael, Lisa, Tommy, Emily, Sophia, and me, I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. The road to this moment had been long and painful, but looking at the smiling faces of my family, I knew it had been worth every struggle.